Good evening, officers, members of the public. Welcome to the Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, 25th of February 2019. Could you please make sure that your mobile phones are switched off or to silent? And can you please pay attention to the fire evacuation rules? There are no tests planned, I understand, for tonight, so if we do catch fire, we all get over to Sainsbury's, over to Waitrose as usual, as we always do in those circumstances. Right, thank you very much. Item number 1 on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting of the ONS meeting here held on 26th November 2018, which are in your agenda papers. Before we confirm them as a correct record, Councillor Ramsdale, to my left, has asked to refer to page 14, at the very bottom there. Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not so much doubting as to what actually was said at the meeting, but I was looking to check with officers, perhaps Richard in particular, yourself, regarding the statement at 7D at the bottom of page 10. Sorry, no. Page 14, item 11. Oh, cracking up.
Read it there.
Where, in answer to a query raised by the chairman, Richard Homewood clarified that Farnham's CRC was owned by Waverley. And the only reason I'm seeking to check that is because people at county have said to me they think they own the CRC and that Waverley owns the site where the lorries discharge or transfer their waste. Now,
thank you, Chair. There's three elements on that site. There's the Farnham depot, which is occupied by Veolia. There's the Glendale depot, which is between that and the CRC. And then there's the CRC. The county certainly operate the CRC. I was pretty sure we own the land it's on. But if they're saying they think they own it, I'll happily go away and check that. But my understanding was we had the freehold of the whole site, but then they leased part of it for the CRC. So I'm happy to go away and check that again with our estates department to see what the land registry actually says about that.
Yeah, I'm not accusing you of being wrong at all. I'm just saying I seem to have got a different impression. And please, yes, can we check it?
So, members, do any other members have any issues in respect of the minutes, which I thought were very nicely written by Kunwa, who sadly left us to greener fields. But, any other issues? No, so, members, you're happy for me to sign those. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 2, apologies for absence and substitutions. We've had apologies from Councillor Peter Isherwood. We don't have a substitution, unless... Councillor Nazir, are you substituting? So you're a member of the committee for tonight. Well, welcome. You may move forward if you wish, as you're a member of the committee, and be on the same row as the others, but you don't have to. Okay, are there any other apologies or substitutions?
No other apologies.
Thank you, Fiona. Okay, item 3 is declaration of interests. To receive from members declarations of interest in relation to any items included on the agenda of this meeting in accordance with the Code of Conduct. Do you have any declarations to make? No. And Fiona?
None received prior to the meeting.
Thank you, Fiona. Item 4 is questions from members of the public. Fiona, do we have any questions from members of the public?
None received.
Thank you. And item 5 is questions from members. Fiona?
None received.
Thank you. And item 6, now it's starting to get into the meat of it. This is our standing item, Environment Corporate Priorities, which is on pages 17 to 22 of your agenda papers. The report provides information of the key corporate priorities that fall within our remit, and we have Kelvin Mills with us and Elizabeth Sims, who are going to, the two of you between you, I gather, present on these. I think if we start with Elizabeth Sims, because Kelvin is here for the grounds maintenance procurement item at the end. I can pass over to Elizabeth, please, for an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good evening, members. So this is your regular update on the environment corporate priorities. As usual, the report has been updated for you under the various headings for each project. Perhaps, Chairman, as I have before, if you're happy, I'll just draw attention to the changes since your last meeting. So the first thing to draw members' attention to is in respect of Local Plan Part 1, paragraph 1.4, at the report publication stage, we indicated that it's anticipated that the Court of Appeal will make a decision regarding the applications for permission to appeal sometime in the first quarter of 2019. Members have very recently received an email from the Borough Solicitor in respect of an update on this, that rather disappointingly, the Court of Appeal has agreed to allow consideration of these challenges on grounds of the general importance of the issue raised and that the argument has not previously been considered at the Court of Appeal. We note that they haven't confirmed that the other ground for allowing proceed to full hearing, which is that there's any real prospect of success. They haven't raised that as a reason for accepting it. So we take some comfort that the reason that it's going forward is that it's a novel argument that the Court of Appeal hasn't previously considered, but it does mean that it now proceeds to full hearing. Moving on to section 3 of the report. In that, we've been providing you with, over the months, an update on where we are with neighbourhood plans. And just a quick update since the report was published. On the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan, the Regulation 14 consultation has now finished. For Chiddingfold, they are soon to start their Regulation 14 consultation. The Regulation 14 consultation for Cranley ends on the 26th of March. For Farnham, you'll be aware that their Regulation 16, which is the submission stage, the consultation that we're carrying out for them, it will be completed on the 21st of March. Moving on, Chairman, to the fourth section of the report, which is in respect of SIL. Members will be aware that we are coming close to now the implementation date for SIL, which is a couple of weeks away on the 1st of March. And the governance arrangements in respect of how the money will be collected and spent have been going through the committee cycle towards agreement executive on the 12th of March and then full council on the 19th of March. In relation to Dunsfold Park, just to update you that the officers are continuing to discuss the emerging implementation of the permission with the applicants, and we are expecting fairly soon now an application for the access to the new settlement, which is the first stage of the detail. That will be a full planning application that will come in due course before the Joint Planning Committee.
Sorry, could you just, are you saying that it's an outline? They've got outline, so it's a reserve matters for the access only, is it?
So this actually is likely to be a full application for a new access. That is our expectation, but in any event, either it's going to be a full application or it will be the discharge of the access under the reserve matters. It will come down to the same thing because it is the detail around the access arrangements to serve the new settlement. But that isn't in yet, and when we get further information on that, you'll see that on the weekly list, and it will go through the normal consultation process. Okay, sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted there, but I just thought it just struck me immediately. But if you wish to continue and finish your bit, then we'll take questions and then we'll take Kelvin's afterwards. Well, one final point from me, Chairman, is just that the Gordon Murray application, which you will have seen again on your weekly list, is an application for commercial development on the aerodrome. That should be coming to the Joint Planning Committee for determination in the next few weeks. I think that's all I wanted to say on the items that fall under my remit, Chairman. I've got nothing further to add. Perhaps hand over to Kelvin at this point. Thank you.
Do you mind if we just leave yours? Because it's almost a separate issue, isn't it? It's an update that we'd asked for. Let's cover the planning issues, so to speak, before we go to the procurement. So, members, do we have any comments, questions, updates that you would like in respect of local plan part 1, particularly, and the challenge? Should we move on from that to the local plan part 2? Yes, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Elizabeth, we have workshops with parish and town councillors and ward members being planned. What's the progress to date?
Do you understand the question? So I'm not sure I understand that question quite. Would you like to rephrase it slightly?
Well, I'm now then going to come on to the table here, which gives a proposed new timetable. And I don't know what credence we can give to the statements there, bearing in mind that I personally am not aware, as a ward member, of workshops with, in my case, Whitley Parish Council.
Okay,
that's clear.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, if you could handle that.
If I can pick that up, Chairman, if I may, we are in the process of looking at potential dates. I think the idea of this is that we would want to focus on about the 3 or 4 parishes where we know there are particular issues that we need to resolve, one of which is obviously Whitley Parish, and we've had meetings with them already, but we are looking at trying to arrange a session which would include the ward councillors and the parish council, just to sort of take stock of where we are with local plan part 2, and that would be the meeting that we'd be having, and we'll be doing the same sort of session for Hazelmere. We may not need to do it after all with Elstead. We're still talking to them about through correspondence with progress on the local plan and their neighbourhood plan. And I think the other one we've talked about whether we might need to do it is Godalming. Although with Godalming, of course, I think the site allocations they didn't generate the same level of excitement and interest as they have been in relation to Hazelmere and some of the rural parishes. So that's the focus, and we are in the process with the portfolio holder of looking to try and identify dates. So hopefully something will be identified very soon, Councillor Lee.
Thank you. May I just...
Please, if you've got a supplementary...
comment, please. Well, we have that table with the 6 boxes in there. I'm just wondering how significant that is. Is it something that we can rely on quite strongly, or something that we've got to treat with a pinch of salt?
They're fairly open, aren't they? I think.
I think, Chairman, if I can say, that's the sort of broad timetable we're working to. Clearly, as things progress, and you know, that we'll try and refine that in terms of actual dates. But I think our aspiration was always to try and move fairly quickly in the summer to a point where we can hopefully get a plan agreed through committee cycle, ready for that next stage of consultation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we, of course, have to bear in mind that we might not even be here during any of that time period, any of us, might we? But the officers probably will, or most of them, although it is Elizabeth's last Environment ONS meeting tonight, I think. I forgot to bring a cake or a bottle of booze, but you've probably got some, I'm sure. But yes, well, thank you very much, but we'll thank you at the end of the meeting. We'll let you off the peer group review, I think. You'll be scarpering. We'll say something there. Anybody else wish to speak? Maurice, on local plan part 1 or neighbourhood plans?
It was more a general question on planning. It's something that's come to my mind recently, that we've got so many large applications that have come forward and reached approval either in full or in outline. Many of them, I'm sure, will be hesitating as to how much they build because of the stalling of the housing market, perhaps. Do they still have to reapply with a full application if after 3 years they haven't started, or are they just going to dig a drain hole and say, yes, we've started this development and we now don't need to do any more until we're ready?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the answer to that is, of course, we don't know how they will go forward in terms of implementation. From our viewpoint, we need to be encouraging them, now they've got their permissions, to get on and build them out for all the reasons we know in terms of the impact on the 5-year housing land supply, the housing delivery test, etc. But in the end, the market will prevail and they will make a decision about when and if they implement their permissions. All I can say is, as you know, in law, if they were to discharge their pre-commencement conditions and get to the point where they're ready to implement, then all they need to do is make a material start to implement the permission and keep it live in perpetuity. And that is the law, and there's nothing we can do to prevent them doing that, nor indeed to require them to then build out the rest of it. They're entitled to build that out in their own time. We can only encourage them to get on with it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Do you wish to come back to that at all? You will, I'm sure, be aware that under item 9 later on, which is the peer review, we will be able to look at an idea of a 2-year rather than a 3-year limit, which is being suggested. But, I've got Councillor Mulliner at the back, who's welcome. Thanks for making it. Yes, a question, please.
Thank you very much. I just wish to express my appreciation to Mrs Sims for a characteristically clear statement of the realities of who is responsible for delivery. It isn't us, and the pressures on developers can be only too easily understood. A little later in this meeting, that may come back, but I was grateful for the clarity of the statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members got any comments on the local plan part 2 or the neighbourhood plans? No. I've received, I'll come to White in a minute, wants to talk about Dunsfold, but while we're going through these sort of roughly in order, in respect of local plan part 1 and part 2, I haven't spoken to the list of people who are, or the list of parish councils who are submitting their neighbourhood plans, but I think it should be appreciated that whilst the neighbourhood planning process did seem to be of some benefit to Farnham originally, because it did seem to defeat some hostile, what you might call hostile applications, it hasn't worked for Folly Hill, certainly, and inspectors seem to think differently to some other people, and certainly to us. We do still need to get them in, even though they're not guaranteed to be the answer to everything by any means. To some extent, it's certainly with CAL now, or within a few days, starting to come in and be counted, at least. Then we do need to have those in place, if for that reason alone. As far as I haven't spoken to the parish councils themselves in respect of habitats issues, but I have had quite a lot of people, particularly more recently, since we've had large developments in Whitley and in Godalming and in Hazelmere, which have brought things into questions, and it's the Sweetman issue and appropriate assessments, and people want to know, why are we not allowed to apply it strictly in the way that the law seems to be? I'm not sure that's a question for Elizabeth this evening. I mean, I think perhaps because we've got Councillor Bolton, the environment portfolio holder, with us. Is there a reason? Can you help us, perhaps, Councillor Bolton? Is there a reason, that people can understand why we don't provide appropriate assessments, and we're not doing the assessments in strictly as the law would seem to require, and the Sweetman would require? Can you help us with that?
No, Chairman.
No. Okay, and you don't know or can't say, because it is something obviously which is very important to people who are producing their neighbourhood plans as to how far they're going with them. I've had a couple of questions on. Let's see, Brightwells is after Dunsfold, so I'll move over to Wyatt. Wyatt, you've got a question on Dunsfold Park.
It just struck me when reading this that in paragraph 4.2 on page 19, we make the note that SIL is accepted for the development at Dunsfold Aerodrome, which is 0 rated. And then in section 5, we don't explain what's happening instead of, or perhaps why it is that the developer at Dunsfold seems to be getting away with it scot-free, or what is happening. Perhaps I thought it would be appropriate if Elizabeth or Graham might give us a quick explanation as to if there is. I appreciate it doesn't affect the current application because that's pre-SIL, but presuming there's another one comes through, what would we anticipate happens then if Dunsfold continues to be 0 rated?
Who'd like to take that?
Thank you, Chairman. So clearly what we're referring to in section 5 there is the building out of the extant planning permission on Dunsfold Park, which was agreed by the Secretary of State and survived the legal challenge. And that came in at a time where we didn't have SIL, so it was subject to actually quite a very good package on section 106, provides all the necessary infrastructure. So that is the tool available to us at the time, but it also remains, in our view, the correct mechanism for securing section for infrastructure provision for the new settlement, because it is largely based on site-specific infrastructure to be delivered on site, but also there's a very great need to ensure that the impact of that new settlement is mitigated in the immediate environs of Dunsfold Park. And Section 106 is the most appropriate tool for that because, of course, SIL can be spent more widely within the borough. So for all the reasons that we satisfied the examiner at the SIL examination on Dunsfold Park remains exempt from SIL, and Section 106 will remain the appropriate means of securing infrastructure both now on the current permission and indeed going forward. So I hope that answers the question.
Members, do any of you want to follow up on Dunsfold at all? If I may just ask, on the same question, on the same issue, I sort of have the impression that Dunsfold Park are actually paying quite a lot of money, where some developers around Cranley have managed to get away very lightly. Dunsfold Park are actually paying quite a lot of money. I don't know if it's 50 million or a large amount. How would it compare if we had charged SIL instead of Section 106? Would they have, would we be thinking, oh, they've got away with it, or would we be thinking, actually, we've done quite well out of them anyway, in your opinion? Or can't you say?
Thank you, Chairman. So for all the reasons on timing, we didn't have to make that calculation. And of course, we maintain the fact that we still think Section 106 is the correct mechanism. Having said all that, we were very pleased to recommend the package of measures, which particularly in transport terms, the Highway Authority felt was a very good package of measures. I can't off the top of my head remember the precise figure, and I wouldn't want to mislead the committee. Other members may recall it, but it was, in the Highway Authority's view, a very good negotiation and a very good package, and will achieve substantial income to fund the impact of the new settlement. So as a planning authority, we should be very pleased with the agreement that was reached. Thank you.
Members, any comment? No? Okay. Where are we after? Dunsfold Park. Brightwells, any comments from members in respect to Brightwells? There is a slight update to that, isn't it, where it says that the construction bridge work that has now been completed and the construction access bridge is open at paragraph 6.1 on page 20. The Gostry Centre has now completed its relocation to the newly refurbished Memorial Hall. We all know that's open. There is we are, I think, at another ONS committee, a community ONS, going to be looking at the issues regarding the Memorial Hall construction and the contractors there, but I understand that has been put back because I didn't see it on the agenda the other day. Thank you. Now, I did get a letter from Anne Cooper, and she has some concerns in respect of Brightwell House, particularly I think there's an acceptance that we might well lose the theatre soon, but we don't want to lose the Brightwell House as well. And the concern is that as to whether the underpinning, which was identified about 10 years ago in a major structural survey, is completed, has been completed, or whether it will be completed before the demolition works or piling commence. I've tried to chase that with officers because I know you've been busy all day out, Elizabeth. Would you know off the top of your head whether that's been done, or whether it's being, or whether we continue to take it up because officers have said they'll look at it tomorrow?
So apologies, Chairman, I don't know the answer to that question, but I can certainly take it offline and understand the timing of that discharging.
You understand it is an important issue because that underpinning was meant to have been done before any demolition, and it could cause serious danger. And it may just be that people with changes of staff and whatever, the need for that to be done first has been missed, but very possibly. It is in the major structural report from about 10 years ago. That's got to be done first. And we understand why it hasn't been done previous. In the past 10 years, we were waiting for the development to start. It would also be helpful to know when the demolition is likely to commence. They've asked, is our demolition still on target there? Because I think the date's for next week.
Thank you, Chairman. Confirmation, yes, obviously the underpinning will be done before any demolition starts, but it will be week commencing the 11th of February. Oh, March.
Thank you. Okay, that's useful. And Mr. Cooper had put in a question to us to the 18th of September 2017 meeting here. And the response was He's quoted from it, but the response was that the outstanding premix modelling of the intended operation of the Royal Deer Junction will be modelled after works have commenced. Now, effectively, works have just commenced, haven't they, on the Brightwells, main Brightwells scheme, because the other works have been done under permitted development rights, the sewerage works. So the Brightwell scheme has effectively just started, you know, over these weeks, really, hasn't it, in terms of what the permission that the developers had, because they could not commence until the bridge had been completed and under conditions. Yeah. But the question is, can you please check, for me to ask whether I can check that Surrey Highways and Crest do intend to carry out the modelling and assessment prior to the East Street pedestrianisation road works, because they're scheduled for later this year and we still haven't seen any modelling. Do we know whether that's being done?
So I think, Chairman, may I suggest if you were to forward me those questions, I'll be able to provide you with some answers offline, because I wouldn't want to mislead the committee. I don't know the answer to that.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I do understand that you wouldn't, you probably wouldn't be able to. I tried to give notice, but everybody was very busy today. So
thank you.
But yes, we will take those outside the meeting. But I did say I'd ask this evening, and I'll have. Thank you very much indeed. Members, any of the members with questions on Brightwells or anything else on the corporate priorities? Or do we now move on to grounds maintenance with Kelvin? Kelvin?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've got a ground maintenance procurement update for you. The ground maintenance contract conditions and specification are finished and agreed. And as agreed by Project Board and the Task and Finish group, that the contract evaluation of the tenders will be based purely on quality, and the contract sum be fixed by the Council. The contract will have a big focus, therefore, on performance management in line with the ONS recommendations, and there will be a separate performance incentive bonus available should a contractor meet the desired performance level each year of the contract. In fixing the contract sum, the Council has reduced the value by £100,000. However, £50,000 will be kept back for an incentive, performance incentive. ODU notice was dispatched on the 25th of January and published on the 28th. And the first day of the procurement process was live at the standard qualification stage. The return deadline was the 22nd of February. And now we're in the evaluation period from now until the 1st of March. Bidders will be informed of the outcome week commencing the 4th of March next week. And the intention is to produce a short list of tenderers who will then be invited to tender. The ITC stage will commence the 11th of March and run until the 5th of April. The evaluation period will be 8th to the 19th of April. So the tenderers will be notified of the intention to award at the end of April, and there will be a voluntary standstill period April to May, and the contract will be awarded late May, early June. And this with the view with the contract starting 1st of November 2019. And it will be on a 5-year, 5 plus 5 plus 5 basis. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. And those dates are in line with the other contracts that we've got. Members, and I know some of our members are quite interested in this because you went through this in the task group in more detail. Do you have any questions for Kelvin? Before, I think we might be able to let him go if you don't. And he can get an early night, or late early night. Okay. Members, are you happy with that? Thank you very much indeed for that update. We'd ask you, thank you for coming along, Kelvin. Yes, you may disappear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The recommendation is that simply that we note the progress as a standing item on corporate priorities. Consider whether as there's any items on there that we'd like to bring forward onto the forward programme. We haven't highlighted anything here that we are going to ask to be put onto the next ONS, I don't think, because that will be the first after the elections, where there will probably be some training involved, and we've got to sort out exactly what's going to be done at that meeting. But we're not going to add things now, I don't think, unless anyone's particularly keen to. No? Thank you very much. Okay, if we move on to the next item, which is agenda item 7, the air quality update, and Richard Homewood starts to hog things. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. You have a report before you which outlines the work that's gone on since the last report to you. Certainly the Air Quality Steering Group and the Farnham Air Quality Working Group are continuing to focus on air quality issues and do some useful work with officers. We will shortly have the December results, and that will mean we'll have a full year of diffusion tube data that we're confident we can rely on, and that will help us move forward considerably to have a clearer understanding of what air quality issues are in the borough. With the Farnham Air Quality Working Group, we've reviewed the air quality monitoring network and agreed a number of relocations of tubes. We didn't do those until January because we wanted that full year of data to be something that was relevant. So we'll have that full year of data now, and the tubes were moved at the start of January to the new locations. There were a number of them were moved, but the bulk of them did stay where they are. The important thing with that is that they are now at what are called relevant locations. That is, they are near a property that people live in that will be affected by the quality of the air that they're measuring. One or two of them were too far away to be relevant, so that was an important step forward, and we're grateful for the air quality working groups for their cooperation and support on those. The other piece of good news is that we have fully revamped the air quality analysers, the automatic analysers, and we now have a new company managing those, and that new company has now set up live data on the website. So it refers in the report to the Air Quality England website, and you can see live data on that website now. That's the front page for Waverley, indicating the two locations of the analysers, the two large green elements there. And I think Fiona's going to attempt to show us the live data. We looked a bit earlier for the data, which was 6 o'clock tonight. So it's very live information that you're getting in terms of the air quality in those two locations. So this is the Farnham Woolmead air quality analyzer, and these are the readings at, I can't quite read it from here, 1800 is it, or 1800. So that was 6 o'clock this evening. You can see exactly what the air quality was like there. You can play around with the data on here. You can produce graphs, and I think Fiona's going to try and do that now. Choose a type of pollutant, and there's a graph tracing the levels of pollution over the last few days at that monitoring site. So a huge step forward in the transparency of our air quality data. The general public can now access that data live, and that's a real step forward that we're very pleased about. The only caution we have to use with that is it is raw data. It hasn't been verified or ratified at all, so there is some caution needs to be used in using that data at the moment, but it is a huge step forward in the transparency of our air quality monitoring work that we're doing. On top of that, all of the diffusion tube data we publish on a monthly basis as soon as we get it on the website, but again, that is raw data, so there's always some caution over that as well. But we feel we're now in a strong position moving forward to produce the annual air quality statement for 2019, and we'll bring that to your June meeting. And then we can start work, once we've got that full year of data, we've done the annual air quality status report, then the working groups can start looking at the action plan and reworking the action plan to bring it up to date and make it a relevant and real document. So I think we're nearly there in terms of getting all of our air quality monitoring back on track and getting some transparency and openness in the data that people can have confidence in it as well. The other things flagged up in the report, there is the schools project, and there's a list of all the activities around that schools project in there. That's to raise awareness amongst school children about air quality. And there is also some air quality modelling work that we're doing with our colleagues across Surrey to look at not just NO2, PM10, but also PM2.5, the much smaller particles which can penetrate through the membranes in the lungs and cause more harm to the body. So we're looking at modelling 2.5s across, PM2.5 across the county to highlight any areas where we need to do further research and work on that as well. So that's really all the work around air quality. Just a brief note there about electric vehicle charging. It's one way we can set an example to contribute towards reducing poor air quality in the borough, and we are working to look to install electric vehicle charging points in one main car park in each of the 4 conurbations in the coming months, so that we can start to encourage more people to move over to electric vehicles. It's a small step, but a step in the right direction. And we're also looking at our fleet vehicles. We have a number of pool cars and fleet vehicles here, about switching those over to electric vehicles as and when they're due for renewal as well. So I think a lot of work's going on. We are in a much stronger position now. It's much more open and transparent, so everybody can see what's going on. And we're looking forward to working with those groups and with the communities in the future to develop the action plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. And I mean, this is good news. We're certainly moving forward from the position we were 2 years ago when, 3 years ago, when we brought this forward onto our agenda. Actually, in the previous guise as a community ONS, but we then created the air quality working groups. We've got a new air quality officer who, with Richard, have done a fantastic job, I think, working alongside particularly Catherine Powell, who's an air quality expert who's working on behalf of the Farnham Society. She's been a great help also in making sure that we get the diffusion tubes into the places where it will, people can be sure that we're perhaps giving the worst possible scenario we're showing. That we're not trying to con the figures or anything in that respect. We need to take care over where we're doing the corrections to the figures, and that's we're going to be working on over the next few months before it comes to committee later in the summertime. So on the issue of engendering public confidence in our air quality figures, so we've got stuff we can rely on. I think we've made a massive move forward. We're not quite there, but a big move forward. And if you can keep me happy on all these scores, then everybody else should be happy. So. Keller Hunter, yes, David.
Stagecoach are moving forward. They've got electric buses running between the park and rides, so they're making huge strides forward. I think that will be good for air quality because they're up and down the town all day. So I think that's a good plus.
Wyatt, yes.
I can totally agree with Councillor Hunter on that, because that's Guildford we're talking about. You wouldn't surprise you to know that the Farnham Air Quality Working Group are trying to suggest that we should be introducing electric buses into Farnham and diverting the through buses to go around the A31 and the other main roads and have pickup points for people to then be transported into the centre of town. But that's all jammed for tomorrow rather than the certainty that's in Richard's report to us.
Okay, members, yes, Dennis, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it is very encouraging to see all this work that's going on in respect of education and raising awareness on a very wide scale. Now, we've mentioned that when that is sort of finally understood, which is imminent from what I hear from you, Richard, then the action plan has to be updated. What sort of feel do you have for when the first actions out of that overall action plan will begin to come into play?
I'd find some difficulty in answering that at the moment. There are some obviously quick wins and quick small measures we can take, such as electric vehicle charging. It will have a minimal impact. We can work with the schools and use pester powers for the children to pester their parents into changing their habits and looking at electric vehicles. But the main source of pollution, air pollution in Waverley, is traffic. We are not the highway authority. We don't have the resources or the role in tackling those transport issues and highway issues. So we have to work with partners. We have to work with the county council. We have to work with the government and other agencies, Highways England, etc., to try and look at how we can resolve those bigger transport issues. One of the key issues in Farnham is the potential pedestrianisation scheme and getting the traffic out of the centre of Farnham. That's a real challenge there. And we can't do that as a borough council. We're responsible for monitoring air quality. The solutions to addressing the air quality problems we identify rest with a number of different agencies, and our role is to push those agencies along with us to come up with the solutions to those problems. It will need huge funding to tackle some of those issues, so it's not going to be a simple task. We can look to work around the edges, but we do need the county council, the highways authority, and perhaps the South East LEP and others, to help the funding process for that, because we are talking huge amounts of money to tackle these problems. Farnham, certainly, it's the north-south traffic going right through the centre that's the real problem, and it's how do you get that out of there without spending 120 million on a bypass, things like that. So there needs to be some very imaginative work done to come up with solutions that are affordable on that, and we need the government support and the county council support for that. So it's not going to be an easy task.
And that's just Farnham.
Thank you very much, Richard, because I appreciate that balancing of the story that we had with this work, and it just shows that time will move on, and it'll take quite a long time, I should imagine. Thank you.
Well, I can assure you that Councillor Ramsdale and I at the Air Quality Steering Group and the Farnham Air Quality Working Group meetings have been trying to bring the action forwards as far as possible. But Wyatt, do you want to say something?
Well, yes, please. I just wanted to assure you, Dennis, that the actions have started, albeit that we're doing the cheap and the easy ones first. Last summer at Rowledge Village Fair and Recklesham Summer Fair, we had a stall trying to advertise and communicate to people the need to walk to school, turn their engine off, all those a series of little cards and leaflets that were available from Waverley Borough Council. I think Rich is underplaying some of the work that his team have done, and the way that with the then portfolio holder now, but significantly increased with encouragement from the current portfolio, Andrew, who's here with us this evening, are pushing to see more things happen. And then you've got the school project that's happened. I'm doing some follow-up to find out what's happened as a result of the school project. Now, it was great having 2 classes being given this performance, but what happens next is what I want to talk to in my county role, the people at county about. But the other thing that we're doing is the 3 county councillors with the Farnham Town Council led by Carol Coburn, with the Borough Council obviously led by Julia Potts. We're talking about trying to get a Farnham Town Centre plan. And in the Farnham Herald and local papers, there's talk about this being the Jeremy Hunt plan. Well, yes, Jeremy's involved, and we've got that kind of leverage to introduce us to the LEP to try and get some funds, maybe some of the 120 million that Richard jokes about us not being able to get our hands on, but I haven't given up on those figures either yet. But that scheme starts with trying to improve the traffic on some of the roads, to reduce it from 2 lanes to single lanes, to improve the amount of thoroughfare for pedestrians. I think we've largely given up on the idea of out-and-out pedestrianisation, where roads become non-available for cars, simply because there's so many spots in Farnham where groups of people would be significantly disadvantaged by not being able to get across the centre of town. But what we want to do is get it to a stage where you cross the centre of town at 10, 15 miles an hour, not treating like a one-way speed track. And if you want to race or go a lot faster, or you're going through the town, it's actually quicker to stay on the A31 or the A325 and make your way around the outside. So these things are happening. But God, is it hard and is it slow?
I'll throw my opinion within as well, of course, because I know I sometimes sound like a broken record when I'm talking about the Royal Deer Junction and the modelling of it and that sort of thing, but it is about that. In 2008, we put together the Air Quality Action Plan at this council. I wasn't a member at the time, and few of you were either, but it was agreed in July 2008 at Council, and the main issue, the main action that was involved was the Crest Nicholson's East Street pedestrianisation scheme, which was claimed by Crest that it was going to be, a solution to our problem in some ways. And of course, there weren't a lot of people who agreed with their assessment there, and we found out that they hadn't really modelled it properly, and that's why we keep asking, when are you going to model it? Because we haven't been able to move on with that still hung over us for 10 years. We haven't been able to move on and get any realistic schemes in place. And of course, the same with, as White has mentioned, Jeremy Hunt's plans and other people's plans for the town centre. We need to get modelling of that done and then get them in front of people if we've got alternatives that work. But at the moment, because of this 10-year hold-up, because of Crest Nicholson, we really are in a stage where we've done nothing, been able to do nothing for 10 years because we couldn't really look at alternatives. So hopefully, very soon, if I keep asking the question of when we're going to have this down modelling so that we can actually sort things out and move on, one day we'll get it, we'll be able to move on. So we are trying as much as we can. And if you want to go and beat up Crest and tell them to knock their heads together with the Berkeley site, the Berkeley site, I mean, Surrey County Council have said that they want, Crest Nicholson and Berkeley Homes, with the two sites on East Street, to talk to each other and work something out. But I think we've got to force them to. But that's where we are, roughly speaking. I don't know whether officers want to comment on that or other members. I just wondered whether you wanted to comment on where we are with the with the air quality action plan and the highways, but only in case you thought that I was misrepresenting the situation to members.
So I just wanted to be clear what I've been asked. Only to say clearly, air quality and transport remain very important considerations in any planning that happens in the town centre, and we're continuing to work with Barclays and Crest in respect of the pedestrianisation elements of the East Street development, and as the air quality monitoring results in updated reports, we continue to take this into account as the up-to-date data to use for planning applications. So it's very good news for us that the monitoring is being put in place and is very effective. Thank you.
Wyatt.
Elizabeth didn't take credit for, which I was expecting, so maybe it was done by county council officers. But officers have, either county or locally, spoken to Crest and spoken to Barclays and said, why don't you two talk together about perhaps how you're going to do with this road, or perhaps even, I think one suggestion was they had a bridge built across between the two multi-level retail organisations, and both came back with variations of the word no. So it's not a lack of the officers trying, it's these two commercial organisations, funnily enough, don't seem to want to work together.
But again, that could be looked upon as an issue where in future we learn from it and we take more control over, how those people are working. It's not very often we're going to develop the whole of, half of Farnham's town centre, though. So.
All we do the other half, we'll know.
But when we do it to Cranley and Hazelmere, when you get your Crest Nicholson and Berkeley Homes sites of 500 homes in your main street, then perhaps we'll learn from the lessons. Okay. Our recommendation on this item is that members receive the report and welcome the progress in improving the openness and transparency of Waverley's air quality monitoring. And those are true words. It's nice that we're saying, it is moving on. And the proposal for future activity, we've got to work on that still, but that we are working on the air quality issues. You're happy with that, members, and note it. Thank you. Okay. We move on to agenda item 8. On page 31 of your reports. This is a performance report. I'm going to hand over to Nora to talk about this, but I want you to pretty much zap straight to page 55, because that's where we are. And Nora, if I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So this corporate performance report spans the 3 months, October, November, December of 2018, so the third quarter of 2018. The committee is asked to scrutinize and provide observation on your 2 service areas, so it's planning and environmental services as well. So as Chairman said, we are starting on page 55. We'll start with the environmental services. Very good quarter with refuse recycling and street cleaning contract awarded to the new contractor BIFA. There are no areas of concern with regards to complaints, workforce or finance. There are 2 indicators underperforming in the quarter, and I will highlight them as we go through the report. Starting with the indicator E1 at the bottom of the page 55, measuring reject rate, which remains at 10% against the 5% target. The higher trend has been observed now during the past year. And the reasons for that is mainly the contamination at our bring sites, which continues to be a major cause of rejection, along with the stricter rules on the recycling facilities, the rules that the recycling facilities provide, well, the type of materials they are allowed to accept. It's possible that further benchmarking might be required to compare with other authorities, and possibly the review of the target might be necessary going forward. The second indicator that has underperformed can be found on the page 56. It's the second one to last. And at the moment you see it as a green indicator, but I have been advised by the officers that actually this figure is incorrect. The 70, so it's the indicator, sorry, NI 191, residual household waste per household. And the team has revised the figure, and actually the correct figure is 90.6 kilos, not 70. So the indicator is slightly underperforming, and it has fallen into amber. And I have already discussed that matter with Fiona, so there will be correction noted in the minutes just to address that that error that has been made after the report has been already, before the report has been already published. So apologies for this imprecision. The completion of the service plan actions, which starts at the bottom of page 56, is proceeding on target for majority of the actions. There's a handful of actions which has taken longer to complete, and they are listed on the page 56 and 57 as well. The new revised finish dates were agreed with portfolio holder and the senior management, and they are also listed in one of the columns, so we're expecting for them to be finished in the next following months. Moving on to planning, onto the page 59, sorry, 50, I think it would be page 60 actually with the indicators. The services performed well in the third quarter, with all service plan actions expected to complete within the financial year. The staff turnover still remains a little bit high, and the building control income continues to be lower than expected. There are some issues with regards to response rate on level 1 complaints, but there were new corrective measures put in place since the end of the quarter, and it has been noted that as of end of January, all of the level 1 complaints were dealt with on time. There were 2 indicators which performed off target, starting with indicator P1 at the very top of the table, which measures the percentage of all planning applications determined within 26 weeks. This figure looks at 3 out of 448 applications, which took a little bit longer to determine. The second indicator is the one that usually, with which we usually have some issues. It's indicator P2 for all planning appeals allowed, and the 39.6% represents 21 out of 53 appeals allowed. This is the local indicator reflecting a disagreement between the council and the planning inspectorate on matters of planning judgment, but it is not as critical as the nationally monitored designation indicators on which we are performing on target. If I could just take the committee to the page 72, to the new financial table that has been requested by the Value for Money committee, that allows a further, more detailed breakdown of the budget, so more detailed budget analysis as well. Hopefully the committee will find helpful as well. So I think that's that's probably all from me on performance. I'll allow Head of Service to answer any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. And members, any particular questions? Should we start at the beginning, shall we, and just run through the ones? So we're going back to page 55, Environment Service Dashboard. And at the bottom of the page, we've got the Materials Recovery Facilities, MRF, reject rate. So we have asked about that, White and I, in our agenda briefing. And this is partly down to tighter standards being applied, we believe, at the MRF facilities, so they're rejecting more, so the figures have got worse, you know, from a year ago. But also, of course, an element that perhaps we do need to discipline our residents in order to be able to get them to stop contaminating, particularly where there are shared bins in communities where they share blue bins, so you know, there's more likelihood of people just using it for dumping their waste, general waste into, and that sort of thing. So, but if you want to take a look further into that, it's not good that we are twice the level that we're looking. You know, we're trying to hit 5%. This is costing us money because we get money back on this. Do we have any idea? Perhaps Richard could answer that, or Nora, as to what it's actually costing us if we were to remain at double. You know, we're looking at 5%. If we remain at 10%, is there some sort of figure we could pin on that, roughly, that it's costing us? It's probably worth asking, isn't it?
We can look at that, Chair. I'd have some difficulty at the moment because the way we are credited for our recycling performance is changed significantly. I think you may be aware that we've had a conversation previously where we used to receive around £1 million from the County Council in recycling credits. That system is changing, and by next year we'll be down to around £200,000 from the County Council. That isn't because of this reject rate, but it's because of the way the mechanisms are being worked for recognising our recycling performance has changed significantly. And that's will change again when the county direct us to deliver all our recycling to them when the new contract starts on the 1st of November, and it will then drop a further £80,000. So we'll be getting about £120,000 a year instead of nearly £1 million. So that's been a big impact on us, but as I say, so in terms of the impact of this higher reject rate here, it won't be as significant now as it would have been a few years ago.
It sounds a bit depressing. Why?
It is depressing, yeah. I don't know what the weight is of the amount of waste on the back of a truck, but it costs Surrey County Council, out of which they would find that rebate back to Waverley, £110 a tonne to take the waste to take the waste as waste that can't be recycled to a waste recovery centre, as opposed to being sent for recycling. So, what does a typical lorry carry? 4 tonnes or something?
More, perhaps.
So, what's a bit more? So, £400, £500.
Well, the big truck's 38 tonner, isn't it?
Is it? Oh, okay.
That's a petrol tanker.
Whatever the number is, it's at times £110 per tonne. It must soon add up in terms of this MRF thing. Personally, I wish we could go back over that decision on closing the bring sites, i.e. not the CRCs, i.e. the locations where there's manned staff helping people put things in the right containers, but the boxes at the side of the roads where people can come along and put stuff into the right container of their own accord, or not.
And Richard, I think I'm right in saying that you told us that China's now only taking 4 kinds of plastic, and that's one of the reasons why the MRFs are having to be a lot tighter.
Yes, Chair. I'd put it round the other way. The main cause of this increased reject rate is the tighter restrictions on what the companies will accept. And the companies in this country are having to be stricter on what they'll accept because China is getting much stricter on what it will accept in terms of our recycling products. So it's from the front end backwards, if you like. The restrictions are with China. They're imposing restrictions on the producers, the processors in this country, so the processors are imposing restrictions on us, and it's as simple as that. That doesn't minimise the problem we're having with our bring sites, which are heavily contaminated. I think if any of you visit one of our Waverley bring sites, you'll see the amount of non-recyclable material that gets dumped at those. We are taking some enforcement action on that where we can. We've had things like sofas dumped there, all sorts of mattresses, lots of packaging material, all sorts of things gets dumped at our bring sites which can't be recycled. And when that goes in the lorry, the whole load gets rejected every time. So it is a serious issue we've got. And part of that is because there are no staff there to keep an eye on those sites, as compared with the county council sites, which Councillor Ramsdale said are supervised. So it's an issue for us, but the restrictions coming from China are the bigger driver, I think, in terms of this reject rate. Chairman. But
all we really can do is try and encourage residents to recycle as very best they can, because that is at least, you know, maximising our income and minimising our costs. Whatever, isn't it?
And we do, through the contractor, we do operate the bin hanger scheme, where we'll put a hanger on a bin that has contamination in it and not empty it and tell the resident what they need to take out before it'll be collected. So we're doing that. We are running promotional campaigns all the time to help educate the community as to what they can and can't recycle. But it's a continual and uphill struggle to maintain the momentum with that. Having said that, we are one of 2 local authorities in Surrey that have increased our recycling performance in the last 12 months. There's us and one other, I can't remember the other local authority, but we increased our recycling by 3-point-something% in the last 12 months. All the other 9 of the 11 have reduced their performance on recycling. So we are still going in the right direction overall, but we're getting more rejected. If we weren't getting those rejections, we'd be even further ahead.
Okay. Members, yes, Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Richard, the recycling directory on the website, can you give us a feel for how well utilised that is? Let me just give you my example. With 2018 coming to an end, there was a big desk diary at home. So there's plenty of paper in there, there's cardboard in there, but there's sort of material in the respect of binding, and then there's metal on the edges. So having looked for a desk diary, never found any reference in the directory, and very helpfully it says if it's not here, then enter in what you're interested in and we will be updating. Now that's sort of 3 weeks ago and nothing's happened. Please. And then the other thing is perfume bottles. I thought that was a pretty reasonable statement. So you put in P for perfume and it comes up with C for cosmetics and various things around C. I would think that that directory needs looking at to make it more usable, is my thought anyway. So
certainly, Chair, I'll take that away and follow it up, and I'll drop everybody a line to confirm what's being done.
Absolutely. Of course, there is absolutely no criticism of any officers whatsoever by Councillor Lee in this respect. It's just I have to say that before everything I say now. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Anybody else wish to comment on that? So shall we move on to the issue of... Sorry, you did want to speak? Councillor Byam.
Just an interesting point which Dennis brought up about desk diaries or whatever. I've been trying like mad to recycle some of the paperwork and whatever that we've got in our study. And if I get a binder like these out, which have got wire or plastic end into, I'll pull it out and I'll make sure it's free. If it's a diary, I'll rip the covers off and put the covers off in the right bin. Now, I'm a bit of an idiot like that. I'll do those sorts of things. Not everybody will. But if you go to a CRC and you look inside, for instance, and the only one I ever use is Cranley, and not very frequently at all. But first of all, I don't see any particular advice from members of staff of any sort. They're not monitoring didn't appear to monitor anything that was happening. And you look in, for instance, a electrical bin, and there's a whole mixture of things there. And each product, of course, has got a dozen different types of material in a particular finished product. Lots of plastic in it. If it's a lawnmower, the plastic grass bin, etc. How do they cope with it? And how? Okay, if we're doing our normal recycling, it's a different situation. But how do they just reject it? Because there is a lot of mixed materials in everything that we have and do.
Wyatt?
Maurice, I believe on electrical goods, what happens is that they're sold or probably transferred over at a lesser cost than that £110 figure for general waste that I talked about, to a organisation that then on an industrial park somewhere, I think there's one in Surrey, strip them apart, know what the metal components are and the plastic, then probably feed the rubbish plastic, I can call it that, back into the system where it costs us £110 a tonne. But the metal, but it will go back through a commercial waste then, not through the household waste. But the metal components are then stripped off and sent to the different specialists that will then use them. It's not unusual with commercial waste to be doing that sort of things. All these builders' skips and things you see all go away to a yard where they're pulled apart to take the stuff in different directions. I think it's all largely a manual process.
Would you like to add anything, Richard?
I think, Chair, if you go to the County Council's community recycling centres, there will be large containers there full of electrical equipment, lawn mowers, all sorts of multiple material products. And they, as Councillor Rando said, they go away to different processors, and it is very labour intensive breaking down those. And it may be that they grind them through a big machine and then separate them by magnets and by other ways, the plastics and the metals and that sort of thing. But that's very different from the process our recycling we collect as a local authority goes through at a materials recycling facility. So it's what the facility is designed for that determines what we can collect in our bins on the street. So if they said, yes, we can recycle lawnmowers, we could collect lawnmowers, but they don't do lawnmowers because it's very labour intensive and they're bulky items. So, and there is a move, there's some new consultation out at the moment from the government on the suggestion that they may even want us to separate recycling materials a bit more at the house level. And there is a discussion there about having a separate box for glass or paper again, which I know members weren't keen on last time round. And that's because the product is much more valuable when it's separated than if it's mixed in with the other dry mix recyclers, because it takes less work.
Councillor Byrne?
It's going backwards, isn't it? I fought long and hard when we awarded the contract where we had the mixed recycling all going in. I liked the idea that I could put my bottles in one thing and my paper in the other, etc., etc. But we were told very clearly, economically, it wasn't sound, and we get more people to recycle, to get them to go back to the old routine. And some counties, some boroughs are doing that, not necessarily in Surrey, and they've got bag upon bag upon bag sitting outside their back door with all the various elements of their recycling. It's interesting to know how effective that is in terms of people's participation.
Wyatt.
Just to help Councillor Byron, Reigate and Banstead collect at curbside paper separately from the rest of their mixed recycling, and they believe they then achieve a better price, whether that's an actual income or subsidised disposal price for their paper, because it doesn't have any glass contamination particles to it compared to what goes through the recycling. But I think they suffer a slightly lower level of recycling as a result of needing to be fussy about what gets put where. I'd need to stand corrected on that. But I do know they achieve a better price for both their paper and for their mixed recycling, because they get the two separate in the first place.
And we were talking about potentially looking at that ourselves a few years ago, actually, weren't we, to separating out the glass again. And in fact, the EU directive, immediately after we changed to our separated system as opposed to well, mixed system as opposed to the source separation which we'd had before with the black boxes. As soon as we decided to do that, the European Commission decided that the rules were that we had to use the most efficient system possible within reasonable economic criteria. And so we've been in a difficult position at Waverley. We sort of did the wrong thing by making our system easier. But on the other hand, we have increased our recycling rate. So it is a very difficult issue, and if we're out of Europe, we'll be able to probably change the rules a bit and perhaps do things even better. I don't know. Anyone else wish to comment? Andrew, were you asking?
Just to emphasise that the more you look into the details of rubbish, the more interesting it becomes.
The more rubbish you find, yes. Okay, if we can move on, because there was an important matter here for people to make sure they know on page 56, which is the second from bottom, and the indicator is ENI 191, which, as Nora said, unfortunately the 70%, which looks like we've done a wonderful improvement, is an error, and it should be 90.6, so we're very slightly over, and should be orange, as we're very slightly over the 90% target. So that's unfortunate. Residual household waste per household, you know, is linked, obviously, also to some extent to people's habits and the rest. If you would note that, it's not as good as it looks, but I don't think we really want to spend any more time on that issue. Members, you're happy if we move on, I hope, to the bottom of the page. We've got in, on page 56, SB 18 and 19 of ES 3.3 is the introduction of public space protection orders for dog issues and antisocial behaviour, which is obviously something that one or two members are interested in. The revised due date there, I'm afraid, I understand, is 31st of October, 19, not August. But it will be coming to us later this year, is that correct? Thank you very much. And if we, coming back in September, I think, the training programme, if you look at the orange off-targets issues, most of these actually, sorry, at the page of top 57, you see most of them start with the word review, or the last three certainly do. They are only reviews. It's a little bit disappointing that it isn't all done, but we can't do everything. At least we're up to date, and we know, with the information, if not all of the work, we know what it is that is behind, and we know that it's not really particularly important. You know, it's not majorly important things. But if you want to comment on those. Anyone? And then, sorry, Richard.
If I can just quickly, Chair, on the last three there, the civil emergencies response and the business continuity and health and safety, we have been without an emergency planning officer for about 3 months. I'm pleased to say that the new emergency planning officer started today, so that work will now progress.
Thank goodness we haven't had an emergency. Okay.
In fairness, Chair, we did have the Chiddingstone fire.
I'm sorry, did I miss the
Chiddingfold fire and the surgery?
I was out at the time, I think, asleep, I don't know, I'm sorry.
And that was without an emergency planning officer, but the team involved handled it very well.
I'm glad to hear it, thank you very much for that. Members, any comment? If we move on to page 60, which is the large box, mainly green, all planning appeals allowed, as Nora said, 39.6 as opposed to 30. We were under targets at 26.9 a couple of quarters ago, and we were pretty much on target at 30% last quarter, but quarter before last. This last quarter three up till Christmas, we are over on that, but it is not a national indicator. It's our own. It's something to keep an eye on. And then, if we move to page 62, sorry, Mulliner, yes, please do if you wish to speak.
Just three comments, in fact. First, I was able to speak to Mrs. Jacoby, and I think the text for P2 would be slightly clearer. It made it clear it was all planning appeals allowed as a proportion of all appeals that proceeded to determination. some appeals are actually withdrawn. 30% is a government target, and the indication is that we're a little harsher than the government would like. On P152 and 154, I now understand that these have to be treated with a certain amount of caution, because the numerator, the number of allowed appeals, and the denominator do not apply to the same things. Appeals come through many months after the relevant planning decision, and yet all that apparently can be done is to take the number of appeals allowed in a particular quarter and divide that by the number of planning decisions, which have nothing to do with those appeals, taken in that quarter. So depending on the volatility in the number of major planning applications that are coming through, you might get quite different numbers. So I think one just has to be aware that that's not exactly gospel truth. And the last thing, which I brought up at Value for Money, on the chart on the following page, on page 61, I slightly bridle at the text below the columns. Appeal approved, Planning Inspectorate concluded that an incorrect decision was made by Waverley Planning. Well, maybe not. As you will see if you read appeal decisions, they frequently go out of their way to say it's simply a matter of judgment. In fact, we do say that somewhere else. And I think a slightly less self-flagellating form of words could perhaps be found. Thank you.
We're going to give up the self-flagellation, you're suggesting? I don't know about that. That might be popular.
1 G, 2 L's.
Yes, so officers, would you be happy to perhaps try and reword that to Councillor Mulliner's satisfaction? He is correct, I think, in what he's saying. And the idea of P152 and 154, are they, not the idea of them being meaningless figures, pretty much, because of the way they're concocted. Are these national targets? Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So those two are two of the indicators that government uses to assess our performance on appeals. And as Councillor Mullins said, they are interesting in that they are monitoring our
so
major
polite.
and non-major appeal. Sorry.
I said you're so polite.
Success in an accounting period which is not the same period that the original applications were assessed for their determination and speed. It's just the way government chose to monitor them, but they are the ways in which we need to express them to return the information to government. I think one thing that Mrs Jacobi may have explained to you, Councillor Mullen, which might be interesting to the rest of the committee, is for purposes of reporting corporately, in a quarter, we try to give you best estimate based on the data for that quarter. But for the government return, we're usually working to an accounting period, which they will give you warning of and then ask for the information to be returned on. And at present, the government seems to be occupied by various other things and seems to have lost a little bit of interest in asking for returns on major appeals, but it will come. And as you'll be seeing on the committee agendas, we give the best estimate for that accounting period as far as we are anticipating it to you on a regular basis. But at present, we don't know precisely which accounting period they're going to be requesting for us, so we don't know precisely what our return will be. But as we always say at planning committees, it is a really important indicator to be mindful of, because you can so quickly, after a couple of difficult appeal decisions, move the wrong side of that 10% threshold, which is why we flag it up so frequently to you. So I hope that's answered your question and confirms what you're saying.
Actually, I fear for once things have got a bit muddier. What I understood is that when we report with this performance indicator format, the numbers we quote there, like that 11.8%, is simply an estimate, I think a guesstimate would be fairer, based on the actual number of appeals allowed in that quarter, divided by the number of major decisions that we decided in that quarter. So if you like, if I understood Mrs. Jacobi correctly, the numerator and the denominator are different animals. Now, I'm not sure how else you can do it, to be honest, because the way the government works is that they will take a 2-year period, They will wait until every appeal that could be heard or determined for those particular applications has been heard. Then they know precisely how many major applications there were in that 2-year period, and they know how many appeals were allowed in respect of those decisions in that 2-year period, and then they can give an accurate answer. But of course, that's about 2 years and 6 or 9 months later. So you're giving us an up-to-date guesstimate, but you are having to use a numerator which is appeals announced, if you like, in a quarter, divided by decisions which have nothing to do with those appeals taken in that quarter.
Is he right?
You are right, Councillor Muller, I recognise that, but it's best endeavours. I don't think there's anything that we can do about that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll stick with the mud then. Great. Members, do we have any comments on that? No. If we move on then to page 62, on there we've got complaints. Not particularly good, but obviously we've got peer review and things we'll be speaking about next, which hopefully might have an impact on that. Elizabeth, at our agenda briefing, did you tell us in respect of the top of page 63 where we've got some low recruitment success in terms of the workforce, did you say that you had spoken to the Chief Executive Officer about that and pointed out that we needed specialist attention? I made a note like that. I think it must have come from you.
I think it's fair to say, and we acknowledge this in our merging service plan, Chairman, as an identified action, that over some period of time now we've been having considerable recruitment challenges within planning. I think other professions may have experienced the same challenges, but particularly in planning, there is a notable dearth of experienced planners out there to recruit. All authorities seem to be trying to recruit the same few people. And at the moment, members will notice we have quite a lot of temporary staff, we have quite a lot of turnover. What the ideal is to get to the point where we reduce turnover and we start to stabilise our establishment, and it's a requirement for both development management particularly, but also for planning policy. So the answer to your question is I have seen it as a piece of work I think needs to be done, dedicated piece of work to look at the recruitment challenges for planning, and I've included that with the agreement of senior management and the portfolio holder as an identified project for the planning service going forward with some support from HR. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any comments on the staffing issue? Should we move on to the finance in the box below? I think it's important actually if you just have to quickly read the bit below that, because it's telling us that, okay, we're £100,000 down on what we'd hoped, despite few advantages from street naming and numbering. The development management income and building control income are lower than expected, and I think we need to keep our eye on that sort of thing, as it is within our remit certainly, and it's important to us. So if anybody would wish to comment on that, or officers perhaps add anything. No. Okay. Members, any comments in respect of that, or shall we move to the recommendation, which I think is just a note? You happy? Okay, which is the recommendation is that we consider the performance and service areas under the remit of the committee, as we've done, and make any recommendations to senior management or the executive as appropriate. Would you like to pick up on anything that's gone through? I don't think there's anything earth-shattering that we need to. A couple of things just we've asked the officers to pick up on, but nothing to the executive. Are you happy? Agreed? Okay. We now move on to the item which we've had a few visitors for as well, which is good. Which is our LGA Planning Peer Review Reports and Action Plan. This is on pages 73 to 120 of the agenda papers, item 9. We have got Stephen Muller and David Beeman who wish to speak. I will introduce them. I'll allow the officers to ask Elizabeth Sims to introduce this item, and we'll bring in our guests into the debate. And also Councillor Follows is here to speak on it as well, as indicated. Thank you very much. Elizabeth Sims, if you'd introduce this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, this report sets out the background to and the conclusions of the peer review that was carried out last year into planning decision making. This was an action recommended from the Ransford-Stewart Review of Planning in 2017, which itself was a recommendation of the Corporate Strategic Review in 2016. The peer review was carried out last year by the Local Government Association. Their report, at Appendix 1 of your agenda, details the purpose, scope and broad conclusions of the review. At page 75 of your agenda are the peer review recommendations. The key recommendation in R1 is that the Council needs to improve the operation and efficiency of planning decision-making through increased delegation, simplifying and adhering to agreed protocols, and creating one borough-wide planning committee. There were a number of other recommendations in respect of the role of the Council in housing delivery and customer engagement. And officers have constructed a draft action plan, which is attached at Appendix 2 of your agenda, to set out the actions that we feel are needed to deliver the peer review recommendations. The action plan has 3 sections based on grouping the 8 recommendations of the review. These are: first grouping around housing delivery, second grouping around planning decision-making structures and processes, and a third group of customer engagement recommendations. Members will probably recall that an all-member workshop was held in December to gauge members' responses to the draft recommendations and actions. The feedback from that workshop is set out in the report at Appendix 3 of your agenda. Paragraphs 15 to 18 of your agenda on page 76 summarise those responses. Notably, members expressed strong concern with increased delegation and also, critically, the establishment of one borough-wide planning committee. And there was varying degrees of concern and support for other recommendations. So, members, you're invited as a scrutiny committee to consider the draft action plan and recommendations, and bearing in mind, of course, the wider feedback from the member workshop. And the recommendation is clearly that you provide comments on this back onto the executive. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. So note, members, that this is not a recommendation from the executive that's been put in front of us for us to support or critique or whatever. It is a little bit wider than that, because the recommendations are obviously, they do include the changing of from 5 committees to 1 committee in some form or another, but there are also some nuances of them which I'm sure you're going to want to comment on. What did you want to speak on this first, or were you? Shall I open it to the floor?
Please open it to the floor. I see it as a logical progression from what was recommended, what's been put in the initial report, and then how officers have simply taken those recommendations and put them into an action plan if you agree with them all. I'm glad of the clarification we've just had, because I had thought that perhaps it had been accepted by at least some members of the executive that this is what we actually had to do. So clearly the scope for people to go back to the things that were disagreed with by the all-member workshop, or indeed they disagree with, in any case, whoever said it, whatever.
Well, the recommendation, so where we're heading to, members, is that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee considers the proposed action plan. That's Appendix 2 at page 103. So that's specifically really where we're aimed at. So I don't want to spend too long, it's 8:30, I don't want to spend far too long on the bulk of the peer group report, because we've seen that before. We refer to it if you need to as evidence, but we don't want to debate it or pick out all the spelling mistakes that they've put in it. If you can start with page 103, perhaps take it in what order. Members, I open it to the floor, and that also includes the members who have indicated, Councillors Beeman, Follows and Mulliner, who I think we'll just include in the debate as they wish. So, members, please indicate if you wish to speak. Councillor Beeman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Now, action plans need people to act on them. and obviously. And it's of a bit of concern to me, actually, that, in fact, and I'm very thankful that Elizabeth Sims has alluded to the fact about the difficulties, the challenges facing the planning department. I think in the circumstances, the existing staff do a very good job under a very difficult situation. But I do think we need to crack the recruitment challenge, I think, before we can actually implement any of these sort of actions at all, really. And I think this is an issue. We've got high levels of staff turnover, we've got agency staff employed, which must be a significant cost. We have difficulties filling senior positions in the planning department. So far it's been done by people internally, but in fact we have to come to realise that sometimes we need people from outside to come into the organisation to bring fresh ideas and challenge other people. And really, Chair, I think it's fine, all these recommendations, but I do think the fact that Elizabeth has already alluded to the fact that they're now being taken more seriously, I think that's got to be put in place before we can even contemplate putting any further actions in. Thank you very much.
Okay, would members prefer it if we went through each of the actions or each of the recommendations individually? I don't know how you would prefer to do it. What do you think?
I'm looking around concernedly at one or two people who appear to be nodding. I'd quite like to get home before midnight rather than go all the way through this action by action. And given we had a number of people wanting to speak, let's hear from the people.
Yes. Did you want to speak, Councillor Morrow, this item? Councillor Morrow.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I shall address my remarks to the whole paper, but my focus is on recommendation 1. And I need to make an observation that I think a challenge that was put out when the first sight was had of the PAS recommendations was for evidence that what they were recommending had actually worked elsewhere. Indeed, if I may borrow a phrase from the NPPF, one would wish to see significant and demonstrable benefits in terms of increased delivery rates by doing things differently. And I suppose I was a bit disappointed, but possibly I'd have been naive not to be, to see nothing in this report which actually shows other authorities doing things differently and doing better in terms of delivery as a result. In part, this may be because, as I suspect Mr. Sims and I agree, the real driver for delivery rates is simply profitability. And to suggest, as government ministers are wont to do, that by doing things differently, we in a local planning authority can make a noticeable difference, let alone a significant and demonstrable one, to delivery rates, seems to me very optimistic. But rather than just making what could be seen as rather inexpensive points, I have been giving the whole matter quite a bit of thought. And it really comes down to officer time, and we do not want officer time to be wasted in any way at all. And so although my natural reaction was very much to oppose the idea of greater delegation, particularly because it's quite high already at 92%, I would just like to pass on my own thoughts, for what they're worth, as to what the impact would be on officer time you would hope they would spend on processing pre-commencement conditions more quickly, which appears to be the one, if you like, hard deliverable that one could look for, because having spoken to developers, it's one thing getting the permission, it's quite another getting to the starting point of putting brick on brick, assuming that they want to, of course. And the people I've been speaking to are all the small developers who probably don't have the worries about can they sell a 500-house development in an appropriate time frame. But the real point is this. What the current 4-area committee plus 1 joint planning committee system offers is every member a clear structure as to how they can raise concerns. And I do get colleagues asking me about things when they are worried, but they're not actually on the planning committee, but they expect me and people like me to go and do our job and talk to the officers. And without wishing to say it's a big deal, I think one learns as an experienced planning committee member how to approach the officers, how not to waste their time, but to get the right questions asked and preferably answered. If you move to what I would call was a much less structured system, where there's a small single planning committee, it seems to me that you lose that. and you'll actually have any councillor who is worried about something having very few colleagues to go to, maybe none in his own ward or her own ward, and they will have to go to the offices. And my feeling is that far from moving to a higher delegation and one committee structure to save time, I suspect you would get the unintended consequence that you would have far more time being wasted of officers by councillors asking what to them are perfectly important questions, and you might even get the same question coming up several times. So I suspect, and this is purely a personal speculation, so shouldn't be given any particular weight, that those councils which have always had one planning committee have known no different for many years, and new councillors have joined them at elections and have been quite happy to take things as they are. Personally, I think Waverley did a very good job in 2008, a year after the Conservatives came back to power, in going back to the area planning committees, which certainly addressed a lot of the democratic deficit concerns which I'd heard when I was a humble town councillor. And people seem to be getting post-completion amendments pushed through in a quite extraordinarily lax way. So my feeling is that the present system, as far as the decision-taking is concerned, is pretty good. Despite the very taxing targets for appeals, we seem to do pretty well. And having made the point I did about the appeal metrics perhaps not being quite so definitely accurate as they might appear, I would simply repeat the challenge to officers. If you really want to demonstrate that a new system of working would do better in terms of delivery rates, please provide clear evidence from other authorities elsewhere in the country that this is the case. Because until then, you're asking us to make a change to a system which is actually, I think, quite efficient. To go somewhere which will not produce, in my opinion, any improvements at all, and may even find officers having more time taken up by having to deal with a much larger number of concerned or disgruntled councillors who've been got at by their residents. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't have much to say about the other recommendations, but the big one, which has been put on hold, I would like to think it should be held over a large hole and then released. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that was very well spoken, and I think that probably represents a lot of the views that people put in the original consultation, which was, I think generally, that there were a number of people who thought that people from, to quote, people from Farnham couldn't make decisions on Cranley planning applications because we didn't know it there, you know, which I would argue against that particularly. There are many issues also that were involved in this, not under this recommendation necessarily, but under other recommendations as well. But you see where the member cannot vote on the planning committee in relation to ward matters, and that's something which some people thought, oh, we've got to be able to, you know, to speak and vote on the on things that are in our own wards, and other people think the opposite, that it is going to introduce bias or difficulty, you know, electorally or whatever. The big issue, though, is, you're quite right, do we or do we not move to our, you know, to a one committee system? And although it's on hold, how long is it? Is it just on hold till after the elections? Is it on hold forever? You know, there are certain advantages with it, and myself, I think if we had accountability in the system, if we had sufficient accountability, then there could be some advantages and some time saving. But as we stand, I don't see the accountability that I'd want to move to such a system. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just first off, to agree completely with some of the issues that Councillor Mulliner raised. As an example, I'm going to Guildford on Wednesday to object to an application related to something in my ward that passed at our joint planning committee several weeks back. Now, that planning committee that night, there are I think it's 8 or 9 applications on the docket that night, and none of the members of that committee expect to be there beyond 9 o'clock. So what do you think that does to the quality of that decision making? And I think also, what will residents think that will do to the quality of the decision making? I entirely agree that our 4 committee structure is actually extremely good, and it allows us to represent residents' views. It allows us to talk about things openly. I think it actually does it very well. I also agree with the point regarding emails to planning officers. So I've obviously been a councillor for only a bit over a year, and actually I think the emails that I used to send when I first started as a member of those committees were completely rambling and mad. Now, okay, they're probably still quite rambling and mad, but at least they're a little bit more direct and to the point. So I actually agree with that issue about officers' time probably will be wasted by every single councillor throwing in an issue on planning, as opposed to it being focused into a relatively tight group of planning officers and councillors that work on planning committees. So I actually completely support our current method of running planning committees. Now, I sat on, when I went to the peer review, I joined that with Councillor Ward, as obviously he leads one group of non-majority councillors, and I am myself one group, or a Anelia group in my own right. And we both had this very similar opinions. And actually, the thing that we were both asking, I think it was the councillor from Oxfordshire who was joining us on that, is actually, can you please demonstrate to us the evidence of why this is better elsewhere? I completely agree with the point that if you come in elected to a council where that is the way it's done, you probably just assume that's okay. Personally, I like this one. I think it has better results. I think residents like it more. I think the issues are sometimes residents don't like the outcome. That's going to be natural. But this allows us better discussion. And I think realistically, when you look over the border to Guildford and you see 8 or 9 applications in 2 hours, and then you look at our system where we debate it, sometimes we don't debate it greatly, and sometimes we don't like what we're hearing, but we do get the opportunity. I'd rather keep the opportunity. Thank you.
Councillor Byam.
I voiced my opinions on many occasions of this, and I thought the peer review came up with some terribly wrong conclusions, and the only councillor on that clearly wasn't interested in planning at all. He was just interested in getting things through the system. I won't say any more because I'll start to get angry about the whole system that's gone on, and thank Councillor Mulliner for putting it so beautifully and expressing in many ways my views about the system. I'm not going to be here again in a few months' time, so I'm not going to be involved, but I think the four planning committee system works extremely well for us. We tidied it up by bringing 2 committees into one evening, which hopefully saves time for officers. The biggest problem we have, I think, and Elizabeth pointed it out, is the problems of recruitment and officers, and how we actually work with the new officers and the temporary staff, etc., because we have to have time to build up a level of trust as to what's going on and how we express ourselves. And it's much harder with the moving feast that we have of the planning officers, as good as so many of them are.
Elizabeth, would you like to comment on, I mean, it would be nice, we know sort of no skin off your nose, so to speak, as you're moving on, but I think the benefit of your experience, because there is very much the staff side of this to consider as well. I know obviously staff would all like to have less evening meetings to attend, but there'd be cost implications for the council as well, of course, if we did. But we need to look at both sides of the story here, I think, and also perhaps it might be worth asking Andrew Bolton then to speak about what the executive's position is, because we have got an on hold in front of us. You know, do we need to debate this to any further length than the wonderful words that Councillor Mullin has said that most people perhaps would agree with here from the indications I'm getting. But, you know, we've also got to encourage the rest of the council to have their views. They may not agree with what we say. So, Elizabeth?
Thank you, Chairman. I think just to emphasise that the progress of the report has not, deliberately not, ended up being a reflection of what officers feel should be the outcome, because we procured the LGA to do this bit of work. They looked at it, they gave their views, we've engaged wider membership, and we've expressed that. And as officers, we've set out what we think needs to be done to put that in place. I think with any structure, there are advantages and disadvantages, and I've been working with the current structure for 25 years. I'm very familiar with it. I'm probably not best placed to be particularly objective about it. I'm sure moving to a different structure would have some good things and some bad things. And in fact, there was a period of time that Graham and I will both recall where we had 2 borough-wide overarching planning committees. And to some extent, it meant applications might have been dealt with perhaps in a different way, perhaps more speedily in some instances. But there are advantages with the current structure. It is more, a more local emphasis. It involves more members being able to be involved in planning. And there's no doubt about it that members do seem to like to be on planning committees. So I don't really want to impart my particular views on this. I don't think that was the intention. What we've tried to do here is set out for you what the recommendations of the LGA were, and then structure it in a way that if there is an appetite for putting them in place, what we would need to do as officers to support that. That's probably not answering your question, Chairman, but that's probably the best I can give. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton, I mean, you don't have to speak if you don't wish, of course, but you're here, and you know, as far as this executive is concerned, on an assumption that you might be here after the elections in the same sorts of roles, are you looking to take this further, or would you know the decisions made at the March Executive and Council, do we expect those to last for some time?
At the moment, Mr. Chairman, I can't really answer that point. I would refer you, however, to the bottom of the first page of our agenda item, which gives a little bit about the background.
Can you give us a page number, reference number?
What page is it in your copies? I've got a different... Yeah, page 73. Where
yes.
it describes a little bit about the background and says we had one report, then we had an outside consultants come in, they've come up with another report. I wouldn't want to discard what these outside specialists have said. And I would feel that if we just throw out their main suggestions, recommendations, I would be disappointed because we're saying we don't value the work that you've been doing. Thank you.
As Wyatt says, it might be true, though. But Councillor, but I agree with you. I take on board what you're saying. Yes, we've asked them to cut. You know, they're paid well. We've paid good money to have this, to have them put in their tuppence worth. They've worked elsewhere, and they have put in their tuppence. And not surprisingly, they say we ought to carry on spending money on them as well. But you know, they would say that. Councillor Follows.
Can I just say, sometimes when you do hire consultants like that, it gives you the opportunity to reflect on what you do now, and it is an entirely reasonable and rational conclusion to decide actually what you're doing now is fine, and you've paid for that opportunity to reflect. So I think if you're not discounting it, you've just gone through a process, and that's your outcome. It's not discounting it at all. Thank you.
And of course, it does highlight that we get the chance to look at and see the things they say, and we realise, well, actually, it looks like they've drawn the wrong conclusions, however critical of ourselves we might be. And so, we, you know, should we progress their conclusions to our own conclusion, even though we know they're wrong? Councillor Foroshevsky.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Follows put that beautifully. It summed up exactly why we should do these things, and it gives us the background information we need to be able to say, well, actually, if it's not broken, don't mend it. We seem to be at a period in planning like never before, when I think there's much greater pressures than we've ever seen for a long time, with the growth agenda, with targets being imposed upon us, with local plan. There's so much going on. I would question if now is the time for change. And change at this level, I think, is a step too far. And I think we really need to be looking internally at what we can do better, because I would have to congratulate our planning department, because I think given everything that's happened over these last few years, because like Elizabeth, I can remember, and I'm sure Maurice too, we were members of those committees where we used to sit here till 10 o'clock at night, tired, exhausted, wondering how much more. And those applications towards the end of the evening never got the scrutiny they deserved because you were physically too tired. You know, it's just one of those things. So I wouldn't want to go back to seeing a system that is not as good as what we've currently got. I think there's room for improvement. I think there's things we can do better, and I think there's some of the observations in the action plan are well worth taking on board and looking at. But I have a big problem understanding how, with what's going on currently, that we've talked about some of the big issues that we have here, not just dealing with the local plan as it is and all that goes around it, but also the investment, the recruitment, and everything you need to have to be able to deliver on the planning applications at a time when it's crucial to be delivering upon what we've already agreed. So I would go back to what the recommendation says, and it says that we are proposing an action plan and provides comments to the executive, and that's exactly what we're doing. And those comments aren't to say that we endorse what's been said by the consultant. It's to say that we've actually got a view. I think it works quite well as it is at the moment. We can all make changes, but I don't think the time is right for those changes. I think we need investment into our planning department. We need more resources into our planning department. And we need to appreciate what our planning department does, given the limited resources that they've had up to this point and still been able to deliver us on a lot of the things that we've asked for. So that's my view. I look forward to hearing what other councillors have to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Forashevsky. Dennis, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All that has been said, I essentially concur with. I haven't had experience of the single planning committee, but I can certainly see that if those committees tend to work late into the night, then the quality of the decisions will be less than ideal. I don't find our present system sort of is failing at all. It's natural to think that it can be and it could be improved, but I also feel that the present system does honour local knowledge, and if we can get planning officers who are able to stay in post for quite some time, then their own knowledge of the area that they've been assigned to will improve, and the relationship with the relevant councillors. I do, however, agree with engage with other local authorities in respect of best practice as a way of perhaps just sort of refining our own situation. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Councillor David Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Waverley is unique because it's got 4 distinct areas, towns with mayors, with budgets, and it's unlike Woking or Guildford or these other places that LGA might be looking at, because they were distinct areas of their own before they became Waverley, and I think having the 4 systems, 4 area committees is the best, because this is a wide borough and it's very diverse, and I think that it should remain as it is. Thank you.
I must admit, that, I take on board what you're saying, and I know what you're trying to say about the borough. Actually, the borough used to be it used to be Farnham, didn't it? And extended out to Godalming, and then had the southern villages and whatever added to us, and southeastern villages added. So we did cover Hazelmere behind it. It was actually Farnham originally, and then became Waverley when the south was added on in the 1970s. I think. But is that correct?
No, I think it was a merger.
Hambledon was separate, was it? So,
I think it was Farnham Urban District Council, Hazelmere Urban District Council and Hambledon Rural District Council. And it was Hambledon Rural District Council that Godalming...
The constituency was all of them?
All of those together, I think, became Waverley, but there were certainly at least those 3.
Right, so it was a political constituency.
And there was also Godalming Borough Council.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. I was slightly confused. It was a political constituency, the parliamentary constituency of Farnham extended to include the other areas, in a way as it's now South West Surrey, but it's just a different name. But the issue of whether we're completely different from other boroughs or not, I understand that there are various views on that. Some people tend to think that we're not quite as unique as perhaps we like to think we are. But I don't want to argue about it. There's no point arguing about that. Let's now run through, if we can. the recommendations as quickly as we can, because we do have to agree what we're putting forward to the executive as a committee. I mean, I think that's important that we do. So on page 103, the first recommendation is R2, significantly increase the officer and political oversight and ownership of housing delivery and key local plan priorities, including learning from good practice elsewhere. Do we have any specific? Councillor Mulliner.
I think the one comment to make is it would be good to see some flesh put on those bones. What does it actually mean? Again, to ask the boring question, what would be done differently if you wish to achieve that? I'm very unclear myself.
Mr. Chairman, I'm getting really concerned about the clock and the nature of this discussion. I'm in very much agreement with the observations that have been made about keeping investment, recruitment, valuing local knowledge, being against the concept of the one borough wide plan, and therefore we should be keeping the 5. I think it would be really good to go back to exec and say very strongly that we're strongly of the view should be done. And I get the feeling, although we haven't done a show of hands, that everybody feels that. To go through, I think, one by one, being very picky about trying to improve the words. I'd almost like to be able to suggest to Councillor Mulliner that we kind of adopt a phrase of, it looks all right so far, but we need to know a bit more about the rest of the plan, or maybe the rest of the plan subject to other people having reservations, and then move on.
I think the point is that the executive intends to put a number of these through, and we ought to make comments. I mean, for instance, over the page now on R3, it says the planning service has to reprioritise focus on growth delivery of re-examining roles, responsibilities, targets, and working with internal and external delivery partners. And the number one action there, which is what we're being asked to comment on, is defaulting major housing consents to 2 years implementation rather than 3. I think most people would be in, probably, well, I certainly am, I shouldn't talk for you guys, but I certainly am in favour of that to get them built out faster. Or hopefully it would have some effect on getting things, delivery of the houses after development and less land banking. I don't know, perhaps it wouldn't, perhaps I just find a way around. But I think that's what we're meant to be doing for the March Executive and Council meeting and preparing here for it, that we should give some sort of steer on these as to what it is exactly that we're happy with and what we would ask them to think twice about or want more evidence for before we discuss this. You know that at a council meeting at the end of March, or late March, we are not going to have the opportunity, pre-election council meeting, we're not going to have the opportunity to go through this properly. The executive wants a steer from us, I'm sure. We're here to do that. I know I don't want to stay much later, and we have got a couple of quick items to go through after this as well. But I do think we should agree to the things that we are in favour of particularly and want to see go ahead, and those things we would ask for more perhaps more evidence, as Wyatt says, and I think as Councillor Mulliner is saying. I don't think it's good enough for us just to say, hey, we've looked at it, we've made our comments, Fiona, please go and try and work something out for us. We need to be rather specific, don't we, on this?
Well, perhaps by exception, given how many there are.
Okay, so which we don't agree with specifically. Yeah. And are we talking about the action plan, you think, or the recommendations? Because it's actually the actions we're being asked to comment on. Yes, yes. Okay, so if we can go by exception, what you don't agree with in the actions running through. So we start with member presentation on housing delivery. Nobody objects to that, do they? In recommendation 2, sorry, we're back to page 103. Nobody disagrees with that? Put your hands up if you do. Okay, include housing delivery in 5-year housing land supply information in quarterly performance report and planning committee reports to provide up-to-date tracking against targets. Nobody's got a problem with that, have they? No. Engage with other local authorities in respect of best practice regarding driving delivery agenda. No problem? Thank you. Okay, default major housing consents to 2 years implementation. Do we need... Councillor Mulliner.
Very briefly, Chairman, I think there's quite a bit of doubt in the industry about the effectiveness of this. It's a thing that looks good on the surface, but in practical terms, A, they can always play the material commencement game if they want to, and secondly, once the principle of development has been given for a site, even if the consent lapses, unless they sell it to someone else, it'll be the same people coming back later when they're ready. So I'll just maybe make that comment and perhaps ask officers if they have the similar fears.
Elizabeth?
I have to say, Chairman, I agree entirely, because if permission is granted, it runs with the land. Even if it were to be a different developer and they came back with exactly the same application after the 2-year expiry, it'd be very difficult for the planning authority to reject it on the basis its time expired, because unless there had been material change in circumstances, it'd be duty bound to re-grant it. So I think you're right. I think it sounds great, but I can't see it actually in itself it can enforce quicker delivery, but it's something the government is recommending.
Okay, so on that, can we all agree that we have no objection whatsoever to it, but we query its effectiveness? Yeah, agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, next one, limiting pre-commencement conditions and being more explicit in the development process when a condition needs to be discharged for preoccupation or whatever. I think the law's changed, hasn't it, since this was actually put together, and now we actually do that anyway and have to?
I think there is still scope for including pre-commencement conditions, but they have to be agreed up front with the developer. So we have already started this this process of trying to limit the number that they're imposed, and also to ask for the information up front where possible.
So we can't really object to that if we want. Anyone object? I don't think we can really, but no, okay, we're happy with that. Helping developers find suitable registered housing providers by having housing delivery specialists embedded in the decision-making team. How do we do that? I mean, that's something... Comments? Anyone want to comment on that? Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that in the second to last column, which is headed by when, it says that that aspect has been completed.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's just what Fiona's just said. I didn't know that. So we'll put... Elizabeth?
So, Chairman, that was a recommendation of the peer review, but in fact we've been practicing that for a long time. We have the enabling officers sit with the planning team to encourage a good dialogue. So, yes, we're ahead of that one.
It's perhaps a shame that the consultants didn't notice that we'd already done that then. But never mind, let's move on. Develop account manager type role for certain sites so that offers its own development from application to construction. Yes, could be good. Everybody happy with that? Okay. Any comments against?
I don't think our planning officers have the skills of that particular area. I don't see it. The planning officers are trained for one thing, and then we're asking them to do different things. Are we going to have a multiple of different types of planning officers who deal with different things?
Well, it sounds like it says develop account manager role for certain sites. So it's only for major developments, one would assume. So if you've got Dunsfold, Brightwell, you know, the big sites, then you have a someone else working with the planning officer, presumably, as well as. Would that be the case? Do you know what they're heading for?
Thank you, Chairman. I think this recommendation anticipated there being more ownership from a case officer, getting a file at the outset, dealing with the application, and then seeing it through right to build out, including discharge of all the conditions and any amendments, and working with the developer in terms of ensuring compliance on site, and doing a lot of the dialogue in terms of delivery that the planning policy team do at the moment in terms of encouraging them to build out. Because I think the peer review team felt that the process of having a single officer encouraging that end-to-end process would be beneficial. My personal feeling is, yes, we can introduce that. We take some restructuring of roles, but largely we are doing those areas of work already, but in different places. So it depends on whether there's an expectation on members' part that we change things around to introduce that, or whether you're happy, because it's going on in any event in different parts of the department, that's covered off.
Okay, we supposedly completed that by the end of the year anyway, last year, didn't we? So it's difficult, isn't it, when it's not entirely, the recommendations aren't entirely in line with our understanding of what we're doing. They didn't seem to understand, but there's no objection to officers continuing as they are in that respect, rather than to develop the account manager type role is no different to what we're actually doing then, really. We do that for large developments. I mean, we've had Kelvin in charge of Brightwells and that sort of thing, haven't we, as project managers, and we do have a variation of that. Are we all happy to... Sorry, Dennis, go on.
Sorry, could I just ask, this owning from development or from development to construction. Would that be answered by involving building control with the planning officer at all?
Thank you, Chairman. Clearly, we can't expect our planning officers to act in a building control capacity because it's a different discipline, but it would involve closer liaison on the part of the planning officer. If we manage to secure the building control work in the first instance, of course, it's subject to market competition, so quite often we don't get the work in any event. But if it becomes under Waverley building control and the case officer is tasked with working more closely with the developer to ensure build-out, I think there would be closer dialogue, and we're trying to encourage that in any event with the builder control team going forward. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Maurice, yes.
On that particular point, can we ask how much of the of large applications we actually get building control awarded to us? We lose, I think, almost every one. Am I right, or
we don't get a large proportion, you're right. Usually it's the NHBC and they just carry on going to the NHBC. We're making some inroads and we have taken on, we had one large developer a few years ago, which was over the road with the police station. We've now working with 5 larger developers and we're getting more and more progress with that. But when NHBC throw their building control in for free, we are pushing water uphill somewhat sometimes. But we've got a good team and we're doing very well, but it is slow progress.
Don't get me wrong, I don't want now building control not to get the work. It's just the realities of the situation.
Which could vary with the economy anyway. The percentage that we get is entirely down to how profitable it is for other people to do it, because we end up with the muck in the end, don't we, if it's not profitable, unfortunately, all the hard work. Okay. Mary, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly picking up on something you just mentioned a moment ago, and I happen to agree with you because we've looked at the peer review and we've all come to our own conclusions about it, and I think as a collectively here this evening we've sort of come to the conclusion if it's not broken, don't mend it, and keep and improve what we've got. And by actually agreeing to these action points, I think we are changing the way we potentially are doing things, and it will change it, and we don't know how. And I think we've just got to be mindful at this point that by agreeing to a lot of these recommendations in the way that we are, that it will involve things like restructuring, investment resources. So I'm just trying to be careful about giving too much weight to these in there as it is here, bearing in mind that we are actually, by agreeing to them, restructuring the way we do things without a master plan or an action plan. Thank you, Chairman.
But I'm afraid the point is that it's going to the executive in this format in a couple of weeks' time, or 3 weeks' time, whatever it is, and we will be agreeing it at the council meeting without thinking about it unless we think about them now. This is the whole point. I mean, are we just going to nod these through at the council meeting on a party whip, or are we going to, party line, or are we going to, and nobody's objecting to most? I think we should think about it. Do you? Members, I mean, it's your committee. I can only try and steer you, but you're welcome to do as you wish.
Chairman, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's what the whole point of us being here this evening is, to scrutinise these. But I think we have to be aware and make it very clear as add-ons to what we're saying at the end of this, is that by agreeing to it, we are restructuring.
I don't think all of them are. I think, as Elizabeth said, some of them are just doing already, and it's mistakes by the consultants in thinking that, we should change when we're actually not really changing. We're doing what they've said. Elizabeth,
I think that they were bringing to the debate good practice from elsewhere about how other authorities, and most authorities are facing the delivery challenge, of course, are putting in place measures to encourage building out of sites. So these have all come directly from the report. They're ideas that they were recommending that we could take on to encourage speedier, more efficient delivery of permissions, and then the implementation of conditions, working with developers to build out the sites. Our response was largely, we're mindful of those. There's nothing new what they were suggesting in many respects. It was comforting to know that we're not alone and that there are other things we could do. But I think one of the most useful recommendations they made was recommending that we do engage with other authorities to gain best practice in some of these areas, and we've started doing that. I I don't think that necessarily in agreeing to these recommendations it would be implicitly meaning we'd need to have a fundamental restructure. So I take your point that perhaps it's more about understanding what we're doing at the moment and getting the best out of that, and perhaps tweaking it to adapt what others are doing as well.
Okay, so we're generally happy, are we? I mean, we say that we have one additional planning technician to assist with delivery monitoring for, you know, having the next item actually that we're looking at there. I don't think anybody would have any great difficulty with that sort of thing, would they, to try and get things built out? Because obviously, if it's not working and we're not getting more things delivered, then we're going to try something different or hope the government actually change the rules to make things more, so that we can be more effective in helping to get things delivered. At the moment, we can't do what we can't do. These are just ideas, and none of them are any great shakes other than the big changes, you know, perhaps the planning committees. But we still don't want to be giving you the executive a blank cheque or blind agreement, so because that wouldn't really be helpful to them, would it? Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting that we're on page, I think, 104 at the moment. If we go to page 108, that brings us back to recommendation 1.
The way that it had been sorted into 3 different groups, put 1 at the very end. Don't worry about it. We'll get there. Don't worry. We'll keep going as we are. We're not going to start again, I promise.
Oh, no, but the key element in there is create one borough-wide planning committee. Everything else attends from that, in my view. So if we've rejected create one borough-wide planning committee, then it influences all these other points. And Elizabeth has already said they're doing many of the things. That's how I would view it anyway.
I see it slightly differently. Elizabeth, perhaps?
Sorry, Chairman, I just wanted to apologise, which looks like the recommendations are out of order, but the peer review set them out 1 to 8, and they were not in any particular logical order. So in structuring the action plan into these 3 groups of housing delivery, customer engagement and decision making, we grouped the recommendations, so that's why they're a little bit out of sync. And the second key area was decision making, and that's why recommendation 1 went into that. So that explains why they're a little bit out of sync. Apologies, it looks confusing, but there is a logic behind it.
Morris.
Well, I'm going back to recommendation 3 and looking at that. My personal view is that some of it looks fine and dandy, but I think it's totally impractical at the present time, and that we should reject the whole thing. That is my view about that. It's working with developers and agents. The officers may try and do that. It'll then come to a planning committee, and we're talking about joint planning committees probably, but maybe the other ones that have been called in because local members are unhappy with what's going forward, or they want it heard in open court, and then it gets thrown out. And we've got so many applications that have been thrown out because officers have gone forward and accepted perhaps proposals from developers, or haven't felt able to challenge what they're putting forward. And that's one concern I have. They don't, you come forward with a proposal, you argue a little bit about it, and then say, well, no, he's stuck on that track, that's what he wants to do, and then it comes to a planning committee and it is rejected. So you're saying the danger of officers taking too much ownership, or it becoming their baby to push it through. And it gets thrown out. And I feel sorry for the officers sitting there, and they hear everybody's rubbishing their report because they've accepted whatever it is, and then we throw it all out.
Yes, I mean, that was a concern of my own, definitely. But we do need to have a committee decision on this, really, for the executive. How do other members feel on that point then, as far as our officers becoming more and more, in order to try and help delivery, I mean, whether it's going to succeed or not, should we be asking our officers to get more involved from, birth to death sort of thing of projects, or should we be asking them to try and be more independent of the developer? Councillor Molyneux.
That's very briefly, Chairman. Thank you. I think the idea of, as Elizabeth said, we're already trying to have one officer sticking with one big application throughout, because one of the complaints that I've certainly heard is that the personnel change so often. I mean, one of the characteristics of our officer team is that many are ladies and they sometimes go on maternity leave, and that inevitably means there is a gap. Now, it's perfectly understandable, but to the extent one could have if you like, a team of 1 or 2 people, you could guarantee that one of them was always going to be in the know and could move things along. And I'm thinking about the position after the permission has been given. I think that actually is the part where quite a bit of the dissatisfaction has actually occurred, that it's getting from permission to being able to put the first brick on the site, assuming that you've got every reason to want to do so. So I think that aspect of R3 is extremely wise. And I mean, just looking at the summaries, I think 2, 3, 8 and 7 were ones which, on the whole, either got a tick or people were evenly balanced. It was only number 1, really, which got turned down by everyone. So I think if you're worried about the time we've got this evening, from what I could read from the report and my own memory of the workshop, there weren't a great many concerns. We might have had doubts about how effective they will be, but it was really only recommendation 1 which got people's concern. And I think the other big question which hasn't been addressed, do we agree or not with the idea that ward members should be able to speak, of course, but not vote? And the merit, if you call it a merit, is that they can't speak for more than 2 lots of 4 minutes. Whereas from time to time, and I will not name names, of course, 1 or 2 ward members have gone on for a great deal longer than that when they're part of the debate.
2 lots of 4 minutes actually is quite generous, though, compared to what we get, doesn't it? Obviously, it's a matter of how much needs to be debated, isn't it? And this is one of the concerns. If you're trying to fit 7 things into one meeting, how do you get through it all? But I absolutely agree. Are we going to, members, would you wish us to put in a sort of caveat? Yes, we agree with this, but you know, subject to the resource implications, for instance, because obviously if we're going to be expecting our officers, and the idea here is that our officers, instead of getting to the end of a, you know, it goes through committee, it's granted consent, and then next they're on to the next case, and that one gets forgotten, it's nothing to do with them anymore. We're saying that person's going to own it. So there are obviously resource implications because they've got to follow that as well as doing other work. Is there an assumption within this, as I think a couple of you have suggested, that Dennis certainly has, are we going to then end up with, we don't have the resources because we haven't cut down our officer time by reducing the number of planning committees? Do you know what I mean? In a way, was there a gain in resources that, you know, if we say no to that, are we offsetting, therefore not able to offset it? Is it going to cost us money? Is that a concern for us? I absolutely agree with what Councillor Mulliner has said, that there are just the 2 major issues really that we're looking at, which is the issue of ward members voting. Let's talk about that, because we need to move to that fairly fast, don't we? I think the rest of them are generally fairly, unless you want to say otherwise, the others are fairly benign and may provide improvements, and if they don't, we won't continue with them, presumably. But as far as on page 108, R1, the second part, establish a new protocol where ward member cannot vote on planning committee in relation to ward matters, differentiate between committee role and community representation role, ward members to be limited to the same time given to objectors and supporters, which I think would be 1 or 4 minutes. Is that... what do you think of that? Do we all agree that we are happy to have that new protocol, or do we object to that protocol? Councillor Byam's shaking his head. Councillor Mulliner, yourself, a view? No.
I'm very neutral on this.
Councillor Beeman?
All I would say, Chair, is that I think we have to remember how many members actually turned up to this briefing. It was given at short notice, and I think, if I remember rightly, not all that many members attended, yet all we've got is percentage figures. But personally, I'm in favour of being able to speak but not vote on this.
Councillor Nazir?
Totally agree with Councillor Beeman as well. Thank you.
Members, do we have any other views you want to add in yourselves? It is your committee, it's your views.
I would like to vote on stuff in my ward. Because if you're pinning your name to the mast, you must be able to say.
Any? Why?
Because of some of my previous involvements in property development, I've never been a part of a planning committee. And actually, if I ever get the choice, I'm never going to be a part of a planning committee. because I actually believe you can do more helping the objectors when they're validly objecting to organise themselves, come up with their ideas, structure their thoughts, get quality arguments down. I even help draft some of the stuff. And then I attend the current structure of the meeting and speak out against the plan or whatever it is, if that's the way I and the group of objectors feel. So I actually personally feel, in terms of trying to get the view of the objectors and the ward to happen, I achieved more. And I didn't think that would be the case 5, 8 years ago, wherever it was, about what happened. So personally, I think if you are given that excuse that your one vote can't figure, and therefore I don't have to worry about predetermination arguments, therefore I can align myself with the people who say, over my dead body do we have a development on XYZ field, you're in a stronger position, I think. Whereas if you were to say, oh, I'm going to get involved in the predetermination, therefore withdraw myself, you'd probably get flack from members of the public for pulling yourself out. Whereas if it says up front, sorry, your ward, you're too involved, you need to step back, which is not different to many of our other areas of disclosing an interest or whatever, you'd be better off. But hey,
well, we've got arguments both sides, haven't we? So thank you very much, Wyatt. We've got arguments both sides. So should we put to the executive that there is no clear majority amongst us either way? It's their decision ultimately, and they're going to have to decide. We can't make them do otherwise anyway, can we? And then at the exec meeting, it will then come to council. We've got to try and make that decision at council as easy as possible for us, but we are split, and we're just on that issue. We put that forward. There are fors and against. We appreciate both sides of the argument. And Councillor Hunter,
you can declare an interest and not vote, but you should have that option.
Councillor Forashevsky.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. This is where the report has some meat on the bone, so to speak, because the very thing that White was saying there was about how we're perceived as councillors who are elected to represent our wards. But when it comes to planning, you have to adhere by planning policy and planning law in a democratic system. And that's where it gets very, very difficult, is because your desire to do the right thing. So our electorate might have a great, and rightly so, have the expectation that when they're voting for us, they're voting for us to represent them in this chamber. But what we have to be mindful of is that we're voting on policy.
But we've got to give this steer to the exec without us spending all night and any more time on it. So I think we just agree to see both sides of the story, and that it is down to the exec because they are our elected ruling body, and they can put it to council, and we'll see what everybody wants there. Yeah. So as far as us, can we? Are we all agreed? Is it unanimous that we are against, as a committee and guests, that we are against reviewing the scheme of delegation? Which the bit that's on hold, we agree that it should be on hold, and for considerable time, possibly not brought back immediately to us. Does everybody agree with that? Yeah. About the main issue are one, the review scheme of delegation for planning and to create one borough-wide planning committee. Those two issues there, we don't really want to increase delegation, which I think has been certainly the majority view, and we don't want to create one borough-wide planning committee at the moment without evidence that it is effective, that it's going to make a significant difference. And that's, I think, the point that Councillor Mulliner put very well, that we want evidence before that decision is made, that it will actually improve things and not take away from what people see as being perhaps a more accountable system, a more open system that we've got at the moment. It may be harder work for everyone, and it is hard work, but we don't want to go on all night talking about it. We're happy that we're going to recommend that it remains on hold. We do not want to see that brought in at the moment. Yeah? Agreed? Okay. And the rest of the issues, unless there's something comes up at the exec, somebody points out, we are pretty much happy to go along with for as far as they apply to us, because they don't all, obviously, most of them have been done anyway. Was there anything else in there anybody specifically wanted to pass over comments to the executive. Wyatt?
I was going to comment on page 107 against R7, and I was going to suggest that an appropriate action, especially for the very small parishes where they're wanting to get their hands on a bit of SIL money but can't almost afford to hiring consultants to write a complete neighbourhood plan, whether we should try and make some sort of standard plan available using boilerplate.
I think we're past. Oh, Elizabeth, are we past that stage sort of thing now in the neighbourhood planning stage?
No, there are still neighbourhoods, I believe, that are saying we don't think it's worth our while to finish this off.
I think, Chairman, those that have an intention to get a neighbourhood plan in place are well underway in doing it. There are a couple that who've got their area designated but have stalled. And I think that's probably ultimately down to them thinking about whether actually a neighbourhood plan is really right for them. You know, there is a lot of advice out there, and we will always endeavour to point people in the right direction. But I think because of the progress so far, we've probably gone beyond the point now where we would be able to put some sort of template out there for parishes to work to.
Okay, so members, do you think that, should we change or ask them to look at recommendation 7? I don't believe so, because I think we're past that. I think that might have been a good suggestion 2 or 3 years ago. I don't think it applies now necessarily, because there is support out there if they want to, and they don't. We can't force people to do it if they don't want to. So, are you happy to leave that as it is, to have meetings with the parish councils and review the progress, but you know, as is suggested, or would you like to speak further about you know, Wyatt's suggestion of offering more support? You agree with this as it is? I mean, again, R8 above that, it measures, it talks about the pump house of Brightwells and things, which are almost history to some extent. We're not going to come in with new ways of doing things for those, but nevertheless, we don't disagree with what generally the points they're trying to make, do we? Is there anything else amongst there that you'd like to draw comments on, or we ask Fiona to cover the main issues and state our stated, you know, pass over our stated views to the executive, and we will go along with the other recommendations. We have no great objection to.
Can I just clarify what we've done with R1? As I understood what you were saying, but I'm not sure that's what we've actually kind of confirmed to Fiona, is that generally speaking, everything but what's on page 108, we're in content agreement with, provided it doesn't upset the resources or the other points we're about to make. That the first 2 paragraphs under the actions column, we're actually against. But in the 3rd block in the actions column, we're undecided because we've heard some strong views one way and strong views the other. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Everybody happy that they understand where we are? Excellent. Okay, I think we've just done the recommendation on that, which was that we consider them and the actions and provide comments to the executive. We can't do more on that. We wouldn't want to. We want to go home. Item 10, you guys have been working very hard, or a few of you have been working very hard on the infrastructure task and finish group. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Ramsdale, who might, I expect, bring in Councillor Nick Williams and others. The infrastructure task and finish group update, item 10, which is your extra thin papers that you should have with you.
Well, thank you, Chairman. It's only 9:30. This is absolutely when I was hoping to be able to deal with this, when you're all in the mood to get it through quickly, I hope. It is, yes. So never mind the thickness, feel the quality. Apologise to you all for squeezing this into making it a final report at this stage, but SIL starts this Friday. The exec want to be making decisions on the 12th of March. If the task and finish group had gone away and said, this is where we're at, we've got one more meeting and then we think we'll have a final report for you, we'd have to come back to environmental ONS, and I reckon everybody else would have made their decisions about SIL and it would be too late. So my thanks generally to the team. We did 7 meetings, all of them in working time. So that's Nick, Mary, Morris and Peter, who's not here. I need to pick out Nick because due to my health, there was at least 3 occasions when I wasn't here to do the meeting and all sorts of other things in between. So, and Nick chaired in that time. And I think the momentum carried on all the way through, which is exactly where we wanted to be. So, I mean, sometimes I think we were having meetings almost at weekly intervals to keep up with the suggested timetable that I've forgotten exactly where it came from, but I've got a good idea. Thank you, Wendy. And I'd also like to thank the officers, Wendy in particular, Kunwar is not with us, and Fiona right at the outset for getting us sorted out in the right direction, and Elizabeth for your team. Graham to your left was super, and young Marissa picked me up on a few things that I would have gone wrong and helped. I think we've done the job we wanted to do. What was that job we wanted to do? Well, I think a number of us in this room were concerned that Sil was diving ahead. There was all this money out there. How are we going to get our share or the different shares to different people? So it wasn't so much what should the rules be, how much should it be. It was how's it going to get divvied out. And I think it's that we took away. We seem to be being given from sources semi-unknown specific tasks that seem to be like line management activities that we passed the opportunity over to deal with or passed it back to other people that would be involved on an ongoing basis. Principally, we came up with recommendations to give to the people who are making the final decisions. Clearly, they're recommendations, they may ignore them, but actually I happen to think there's some good stuff in there. Deliberately, we've kept the report short and sweet because we wanted it to be a report that when a member of the executive got it, they glanced through the general introduction stuff and ignored the bump at the end and read the pages of recommendations. I said it should all be on one sheet of A4, but I think 1 or 2 people came up with lots of really positive ideas, and I had to give way and let them include them all. Didn't I, Mary? So, pages 7 to 10, you've got the recommendations set out, nicely collected together in boxes. And then there's also a little bit about relationships, and we've sent, I don't know how many letters out between us, but we've written to all the parish councils, we've written to all the borough councillors, we've written to all the county councillors that represent divisions in Waverley, and indeed I've sent a message out to my fellow cabinet members in Surrey saying your team are playing ball on this. And basically the message is some of it more formal, that we're all about, are you involved? Have we missed anything in the IDP, i.e. the documentation concern? That means that we're missing a trick and that there's not a group. Now, some of those people may stay asleep second time round again and not communicate. I don't know, but we've set it up and we've had a good bash. So more important, I think, is the actions. There's, I think, 8 headings. The first one's all about how to use the IDP. It's a Waverley Borough Council document and approach to doing it. It's not mandated on us, as I understand it. And it's us trying to capture the information as to what should be considered for the funding and indeed be a vehicle for informing people. So you'll see some of the ideas are about what's on there to tell you, has it been approved yet, has it not, as well as where it stands on a RAG scoring. Then there's some actions to do with how the money would be allocated, and indeed a specific suggestion with regard to prioritising, which is all about, hey, if you haven't got new development near you, and there isn't something specific needs to be done, and it's for a different area, then you shouldn't be getting the money because this money is meant to be for areas that are getting the opportunity of more houses and other development. It is opportunity, isn't it? Benefit of. It's one of those. Yeah, there's got to be a positive side. The fourth area is about reporting. This money does not have to be spent on specific activities. It doesn't have to be spent in the region where the development happens, but it struck us as a good idea if it was reported that way, so that if you were, another from Clanfield saying, hey, have we got our share, you'd quickly be able to see on this matrix that a share of the money was going to that area, or if you were particularly concerned about education, you could look to see, are we doing any new schools in Waverley nowadays, and see what was happening at a high level view. The other being that we on Environmental ONS wanted to see reporting coming back to us that things were being spent on the projects that we wanted to look at. We then got some suggestions at item 5 that are about working together. That's the Surrey, Waverley towns. I'd particularly recommend to all of you, have a think about how you team up vertically with the county councillors, perhaps through the local committee, but the people who are there, and the parishes and town councils, to talk and think with one voice. Because clearly, if there's a board established who are looking at a new project, or several new projects for Town X, and the county council is saying he wants a new surgery or a new school, and the Waverley Borough councillors are saying what they want is a new leisure centre, and the town are saying, oh no, we want you to do work on refurbishing the footpaths and fund a toilet for the year, they're going to say, oh, they haven't got their act together. Next. There's ideas on funding levels in item 6. There's advice on supporting the project board. We were concerned that the SIL Advisory Committee, including, I think it's intended, 4 members of the executive, and I think it was going to include the leader and the deputy leader or something of that kind of ilk, and 3 non-executive members of the council are probably going to be amongst the more experienced. I expected them to do everything that fitted into that structure underneath perhaps the board was going a bit over the top. So we were suggesting there be a working group that did a lot of the legwork to pass things on or up the chain. And then finally, we have a training suggestion about the need for borough councillors especially that would get to be involved in this process to be trained and to understand how it worked. And we figured you'd probably want to train the chairman and senior people in the parish and town councils. I guess I've thought for far too long on this already, but I guess some of the people grinning right now might want to help contribute and sort me out on where I've got it wrong. So, Nick, in particular, yourself.
Councillor Williams.
Very, very briefly. I don't really think I got anything to add to what Wyatt has told us. It was a small group, and I think we all worked well together. We had some different views at the beginning, but we came to, I think, and I hope, a proper conclusion. I would, however, echo what Wyatt said regarding our thanks to the officers and how hard they worked in a relatively short period of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the group wish to speak? Councillor Byam and then Councillor Lee.
Just and we managed all of this in the time and not have any advice from the, I've lost the name of the group we were talking about before, the people who did our planning review. We didn't have any outside bodies with us. We were all on our own, and we managed.
We'll get you a peer group of your own next time. So, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wyatt, you made me quite thirsty. Very comprehensively produced and very clearly laid out. I do congratulate you all, and so much content there and so easily appreciated. Thank you.
Councillor Bolton, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify a point, earlier point, the majority of the members of the SIL Advisory Board are not executives. The 4 councillors who are not on the executive, 3 members are on the executive. So,
my apologies if I've remembered that 3 and 4 the wrong way around. But the point I'm just trying to make is that there'd be hard-working, pretty busy people amongst our community, and therefore to have a subsidiary group that did a lot of the legwork would be, in our view, a good thing to think about.
Can I ask you, Councillor Bolton, if you look at 5B, because we need to get into the nitty-gritty of this very quickly and bashed on so our officers who have been here since 8 o'clock this morning can go home. It says consideration should be given to the value of having a Surrey County Council representative on the SIL Advisory Board. Our CIL Advisory Board has already been. I mean, is this a governance board or is this a separate board? Are you talking about in that? I know you've explained that that would be a Surrey County Council member, a councillor, not an officer coming along to the meetings. And of course, it's very likely that a member of the governance board is already on Surrey County Council. It would be, I don't know, perhaps there isn't but there are enough Surrey councillors that one would be on it.
Chairman, Councillor Peter Martin is actually on the SIL Advisory Board, but he's not there in a capacity as a Surrey County Councillor. He's there as a Waverley councillor.
But so the idea, you know, it seems to me here that we're recommending that we change the board to an extra person so that we can have someone there specifically looking after Surrey County Council's needs, but you know, a member. I'm not sure, but we'll allow the executive to think about that. But, you know, I'm not entirely certain, but I'll support it if members wanted that. I did notice at 3A, criteria, we can spell that right when it goes out. New residential development, that ends with, but there are other developments which are also attract CIL, which we shouldn't be excluding in that statement. So we could either change that by qualifying development or some other word that doesn't, you know, rule out the things that aren't residential. I know what you mean, but as far as SIL is concerned, we need to be, you know, reasonably accurate. And I don't think there was anything else. I thought it was, you know, very good work. It was a difficult job to do because you're working parallel with another sort of stream that was going on, trying to do the same thing from a different point of view for the governance board. So very pleased. Thank you so much for the members who, Wyatt and Nick and Mary and Maurice and Peter in his absence, and our officers for wonderful work they've done on pushing through something which wasn't particularly easy to understand and, you know, quite a complicated subject. You've done a good job. I'd recommend it to the executive. I hope the rest of you are agreed, unless there's anybody wishes to make any more comments on it. Mary.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very quick comment. Yes, it was a pleasure to be on this task group, and yeah, it was very good indeed, very interesting, but as you say, equally complicated. The one thing that I would say, and if we go over an item we covered earlier on, the benefits of it and how it's improved things, item 7, ongoing support to the advisory board. I feel this group is very much in its infancy and something greater should evolve from it, so it can be a real attributor to the board. And the example I would give of that is the Air Quality Group, steering group, who are producing some magnificent work in support of final reports. And I say for this to work, the same sort of parallels would be very, very beneficial. Thank you, Chairman.
We do need to, of course, bear in mind that we've got, you know, there are limits to what our officers can do and how many committees they can support and everything else that's going on. But I take on board what you're saying. It's a good idea. We can look at that at our next ONS coordinating board meeting on the 18th. Perhaps send forward some recommendations for after the elections for the ONS committees to look at what they want to do, make it cross or from this committee or whatever. We don't know what any of us will be doing, obviously, except Maurice, particularly, probably after April, May. So, Wyatt, if you'd like to speak.
Just wanted to quickly recap on some of the suggestions I made. Totally obviously happy that we are correct spelling of criteria. At the end of the recommendation in 3 or 3A, yes, new, relevant or new, qualifying, something that makes it clear that we're talking about.
We call it CIL development.
Development that CIL is paid on is obviously what we're intending there. And likewise in 5B, the idea was that a member from Surrey County Council is there representing, yes, Surrey's views, but more importantly, making sure that the two councils are working together and they're not keeping secrets from each other in the way that, would you believe there is a borough who are treating all SIL receipts as if they're all borough monies and trying to ensure they're only spent on borough projects?
But they have to give it to Surrey. They have to give it to Surrey in order for the money to be spent on roads, don't they? Surely they don't try and spend it all on flower pots or something.
I understand, but I can't claim to have it firsthand that no, they are trying to spend it all themselves. And indeed, I believe one councillor of a different persuasion to most of the rest of the council is on record as having said something like, we need to make sure we spend this money so that it doesn't go to county. It isn't that I'm speaking, but what I want us to be doing is working together, county, borough, and then likewise with the parishes who have their own funds but may well have overlapping projects.
Okay, so members would agree that perhaps BB, Fiona can after the meeting add to that just to emphasise the cooperation element of it as part of a recommendation to the executive to consider. Yeah. Members, are we happy to agree to put this forward to the executive as our recommendations from the ONS? Happy? Thank you very much indeed. Okay, if we can then move on. We've got the Joint Enforcement Initiative, which is item 12. Sorry. We have got the service plans, which is pages 121 to 152. Now, at the last meeting of, I don't want to spend much time on these, obviously. I'm going to ask for a brief introduction, but the idea that in the first place was that the corporate plan did not give sufficient detail and detailed targets, that we were all happy with the way that was working, and we wanted to know, you know, where are the measurable goals, for instance, measurable targets and whatever you know, we're aiming towards. And so we asked for more detail, and the officers have come up with it by putting into some detail here what our service plans are. So this is the next level down in delivering the corporate priorities and the corporate plan. So we don't blame the officers for giving us too much detail here. Some of you will want more detail. If there's anything, I assume you've read through them. I am going to ask Richard Homewood to give a very quick introduction to the Environmental Services Plan, and Elizabeth Sims on the Planning Service Plan, and members, if you can keep your comments brief. So, Richard, please.
Thank you, Chair. Given the time, I won't do a full presentation. The service plan is there, as you said, is quite detailed, setting out the range of things that are going on within the service. I'll just highlight some of the key issues for the next year or so. Obviously, for environmental services, it's the new waste contract coming in November. Lots of work going on to mobilise that at the moment. But most importantly, alongside that, maintaining the level of service with the current contractor. And that's going to be a challenge as we move closer to the end date of their contract. They will want to withdraw resources from that. That's a natural business thing to want to do. And it's our challenge to keep on top of that and make sure they maintain levels of service. Big thing looming in the future for them, the government have just published a new waste and resources strategy for consultation, and we'll try and bring you some thoughts on that as well in the near future. For an environmental health service, we've heard about the air quality work that's going on. That will continue at a pace during the coming year with the 2 working groups, and the National Clean Air Strategy that's just been launched. Alongside that, all the work they do on noise complaints, contaminated land, water supplies, all sorts of other things going on in the background. Public space protection orders, the Joint Enforcement Initiative, there is a separate report, so I won't go into detail on that now. That will include things like the public space protection orders for dogs. The dog fouling order is in place. Because of the amount of consultation feedback we received on the dogs on leads, we are reviewing that in more detail, and the report on that will come forward later in the year. And then the issue around limiting the number of dogs that one person can exercise, we need to revisit that with the organisations and the communities involved before we take that forward as well. We have the issues around litter enforcement, which I'll cover off with the joint initiative report. Licensing, from your perspective, animal welfare licensing, new licensing regime was introduced, new legislation, focusing much more on the standard of service provided in establishments and giving them the opportunity for a 3-year licence if they are well-run establishments, rather than an annual licence. So that's another key challenge over the next 12 months to get that new regime in place. One of the biggest things exercising us on parking is the review of the parking strategy, which has stumbled a bit because of everything else we've been doing. We need to put some more momentum behind that in the new year to move that forward and start working with the other councils. We have some proposals from Cranley, we have some proposals from Hazelmere. We need to start working with Farnham and Godalming as well to come up with a strategy that fits each town and will support the local economies in those towns. Car park refurbishments around South Street, discussions are going on with Sainsbury's about refurbishing that. Way Hill and Village Way are also aimed for some significant works this year. We have to renew the parking enforcement contract later this year as well. So that's parking. One of the areas that might not be so obvious in emergency planning terms is Brexit, dare I say. We are working with the Resilience Forum across Surrey to look at things like the impact on infrastructure from stacking of lorries, both from Portsmouth and from Dover and Folkestone, which could all end up log jamming the M25 and the network. We're looking at supply chains for food and other goods. Food shortages are rumoured, and there's work going on around that. Labour supply issues about employing foreign nationals, EU nationals in the borough. All things that are exercising us at the moment in the background that you might not be so familiar with. And then the routine emergency planning issues around fire, flood and famine. We don't get much famine, thankfully, but the fire and floods we do get occasionally. And then alongside that, the business continuity planning. What will we do if this building goes out of action to make sure services continue to be provided? And lastly, protecting and ensuring our staff are safe in the workplace. And sustainability, there is some work going on with that. Electric vehicles, energy efficiency plans, and the electric vehicle charging points, which I've talked about. And that's a very quick run through of all the key things that are going on in the next year or so within environmental services. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, and that is appreciated. I think we're going to have to treat this very much as being this is a guidance for the new councillors and everyone for the next season. So this information we don't want it throwing away. We want it to be there for our next, not for the next Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, but as background so that people can understand everything that's going on and understand the corporate plans. So, can I ask Elizabeth, please, to briefly summarise the planning services?
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I won't give a lengthy presentation having regard to time, but like all the other service plans, it's divided into basically business as usual and then team projects for each section. So in planning, as members will be aware, there are three key sections. There's development management, which incorporates planning enforcement, planning policy, and then building control. The service plan has these two sections. Business as usual is really the day job, routine activities, which you're familiar with. Perhaps I'll just summarise for each section what the key team projects are expected for the next year, falling out of the new corporate plan. For development management, we are moving on with implementing a new IT system. Jane Clement is here from Building Control. She's been leading on the new IT system. And we are at going live point for building control, and the next step is to roll this out for development management. The next project for development management is the review of the enforcement plan. This sets out the priorities for enforcement and guides the operation of that team in terms of the receipt of complaints and how we deal with them in terms of priority order. The third element there is the improvement of planning decision making. That's one of the actions, of course, which falls out of the peer review. We've talked about that already tonight. That doesn't envisage any particular outcome. That just requires us to carry out a review of planning decision making. So the conclusions out of the peer review report will feed into exactly what that means in terms of the project going forward. There's a project there about customer satisfaction improvements. That picks up a lot of actions around increasing our level of engagement with the parishes and towns. We've already started that work during the last year. We've been doing a lot more engagement with the parishes in terms of a roadshow, going around and meeting them and listening to their concerns on the back of the development that's taking place and dovetailing with the neighbourhood planning work that's going on. And then the last key project for development management is that piece of work that I was alluding to earlier, which is in respect of seeking to reduce the level of turnover and encouraging more stability of staffing within that team particularly. For planning policy in terms of team projects, as we've already talked about earlier under the corporate projects, corporate priorities report, we need to move towards the adoption of Local Plan Part 2, which is the second half of the local plan. We need to keep up our support to neighbourhood plans, and we need to continue to support the provision of infrastructure to support planned growth under the 3 key headings of Section 106, SIL, and indeed bidding for other funds, for example, LEP funding or standalone government funds. Under planning policy as well, there's the development of the garden village at Dunsfold as a standalone project under the projects team. And there's also a key objective in terms of the maintenance and enhancement through our specialisms to improve the environment. So, for example, conservation area appraisals and the review of the local listing list, buildings of local merit. Moving on then to building control, the 2 key projects there are, in the first instance, to achieve full electronic working on the back of the new IT system. And again, I'm going to ask Jane just to mention a couple of things on the back of that in a moment. But also to review the business plan, which the Council agreed for building control over a 3-year period, which encourages a more business-like approach and to balancing the budget at the end of the 3-year period. Just, Chairman, with your indulgence, just going to see if Jane wants to add anything to those projects for building control.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, everything's been rolling out with the IT. We're now at Go Live, so that we anticipate Go Live on the 8th, which is the week on Friday. So that's going well with the Agile coming in early summer, June, July time. So we're doing very well there. We are making big improvements as far as the development goes, and we are getting in with developers, as I alluded to earlier. But we do need to obviously keep an eye on the business plan and make sure that we can carry it forward. With the Grenfell and the Hackett review that's going on, the face of building control will be changing, and I envisage that's going to be turning a little bit more towards your enforcement. But we're going to keep a watchful eye and just review that as we go forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, we are not going to get into a discussion on this. We can hold any further discussions forward to our new term next year if we're here. But our recommendation on this is that we make observations to the management team and any policy recommendations to the executive. Are you all happy to agree that we're not going to make any policy recommendations immediately before an election on the basis of the information and the time we've got available now, and that's more properly done in the new term? Are you happy with that? If there's anything particular any of you would like to say about these, I don't want to stop any discussion. If you know, I don't want to be seen as cutting things down, but we've got 3 minutes and we need to go home at 10 o'clock because I'm not going to go on to a vote and going further. So are you happy to note that? Thank you very much. Okay, and our next item is the... and I'd like to thank very much Jane McLennan and Elizabeth Sims, who I think can now disappear off home. Thank you very much for all the services you've done to the Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. You're having a party anyway. We don't need the party poppers now. And everybody here very much appreciates what you've done for the Council. Thank you. So I'm sorry I have to move on incredibly fast because that clock says 2.5 minutes. Richard, you have got 1 minute to summarise the Joint Enforcement Initiative. So if you would please go ahead with that.
Thank you, Chair. Very different approach to other local authorities in Surrey. I always said it would be evolutionary, not revolutionary. The aim is to bring together the enforcement activities across the council as well as with other agencies. It is working. Things are changing. We had some real good joint working with the police last summer around the unauthorised encampments, and that work is continuing to refine and develop. We've got partnership working with East Hants District Council on litter enforcement, and our environmental enforcement team is working well. Planning enforcement are working with us on all of the traveller and unauthorised encampment work that's being done. So very much about bringing people together and not working in silos as they used to in the past. And I think it is taking shape. It was always going to take time, and we're going in the right direction. Lots of detail in the report there for you to look at, but happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Richard. Well, members, if you've seen the pictures here of the sorts of things that we're dealing with, whether it's travellers moving onto sites, having to block those sites off, fly tipping and all the rest of it. There is a rising issue at the moment, which is, of course, as we start enforcing on the littering, people are complaining. If you've got issues, go to Richard with them so that we can try and sort them out direct. We're not going to talk about individual issues here tonight. We've got at the let's take you to the page number, which gives you probably the best picture of what's going on, I think, which is on page 165 of your committee papers. Fixed penalty notices, you can see they've started in the summer, and you know, we are doshing them out. It shows that we're doing things, which is what people want to see. Members, anybody wish to comment upon this? Wyatt.
Thank you, Chairman. Very quickly. As luck would have it, I've had the opportunity to read this document at least twice and look at the pictures even more often than that. It's a really good piece of work, Richard. Thank you very much. And in my role at County, I was invited to and attended a cross-Surrey meeting of the JET teams where they were talking about the different things they'd achieved and done. And it was with great pride I left that room, because Waverley was clearly, I thought, head and shoulders above the rest of the other teams in the room, and that was increasingly beginning to be acknowledged by the consultant. Is it Mike Nash, or Mick Nash? That's where they were at. So I can only applaud what you've achieved with the JET side.
The applause should go to all the staff involved, not, you know, because everybody is.
Would you pass that on from the committee, please, because they're not all here, luckily for them. But,
thank you.
but they're not. If you would pass on those. Members, anybody else wish to comment on that? No. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, the recommendation on that one is to recommend that we receive and welcome the progress made in the Joint Enforcement Initiative. So we're agreed on that. As far as our committee work programme, item 13 on page 177 to 186, there are items coming forward to the July meeting, or June meeting, but it is mainly scrutiny induction. We don't want to put anything heavy in there. There are a few bits that you'll see on page 179, I think it is there. But I'm not going to ask you to put anything further onto it. We don't even know whether we're going to be here. But there will be a meeting there for some people, whether it's us or anyone else. I think that is the end of our meeting. The clock says 21:59, so I'm going to shut up right now before it goes over. Thank you very much, members. Thank you very much to the staff. That says 4 o'clock in the morning. It's wrong. Thank you, gentlemen. And yeah, make sure you get up early for work in the morning. Thank you.